I want to welcome everyone to the Rutherford County Solid Waste Advisory Steering Council. It is February 27th. This is our second meeting together. Before we get started, I think it would be good, just so the people who are watching get an idea of who's on the council, if we maybe could start down and introduce ourselves, that'd be great.
All right, I'm Mary Hickerson, and I'm with the Rutherford County Highway Department.
I'm Lenise Work-Patrick. I'm with the Tennessee Advisory Commission on Intergovernmental Relations.
Andrew Ellard with the City of Eagleville.
H.G. Cole, Smyrna Town Council.
Harry Gill, Smyrna Town Manager.
Paul Latour, Rutherford County Chamber of Commerce.
I'm Michael Cush, Rutherford County Commissioner.
Shane McFarland, Mayor of Murfreesboro.
Jeremy Harrison, All-in-One Recycling.
Kathy Mathis, MTSU.
Joe Whitefield, MTSU.
Garland Russell, City of Laverne.
Kurt Wade, City of Murfreesboro.
Kyle Brown, City of Laverne.
All right, thanks everyone for being here tonight. We'll turn it over to you.
Well, thank you all for showing up for our workshop here, Workshop 2. We have 3 workshops planned for us to help work with you to provide some guidance and steering. You're a steering and advisory council for the county's solid waste master plan that we're trying to develop. And our goal tonight is to really go through and present a lot of the options that are open to you. Now, there's more than we're going to present here, and there's also, you can dig down into any one that we do into many subcategories. So we can explore them as you want, but we tried to give you enough of a broad brush given our time frame to try to give you a sense for what those options are. After we talk about options, we are going to do a little exercise with you to try to get a sense for where your priorities are with the options that are out there, and we'll come back to visit that. We'll also talk tonight about different ways to manage a system that the county can do, and we'll go through 4 different examples along with examples of where this has been done before. We'll talk a little bit tonight about how you'll pay for your system eventually, and then hopefully get a dialogue and really try to hone in on a couple different scenarios. By the next workshop, Workshop 3, I think our intention is to come back with a couple different options in terms of scenarios, not just technologies, but really packaging them together and showing you what they will do in terms of cost, say landfill diversion, how it could be managed, when it could be built, things of that nature, risks associated with it, and so you can now look at one system versus another system, not just one technology for another, but sort of packaging them. But in order to get there, we're going to need some feedback from you as to what you're interested, what you think this county and cities need to help manage their future. So you have a presentation. We have 3 hours, so it's a lot of time. We do have a 10-minute break built in. But this is the agenda. We will talk a little bit about, does anybody not have a copy of the presentation? All right, if anyone in the audience who wants a copy, there are some extra copies up at the table here. But we've done a little bit more analysis on what we see as the need of the cities and the county, mostly focusing on Rutherford County and the city of Murfreesboro. I mentioned about technology options, and then we're going to do a little exercise with you, have a break, and then start off with some organizational possibilities of how the county, cities can work together, work with other parties to manage a system eventually. We'll speak about some options on ways people pay for their systems. And then we're going to hopefully have a lot of brainstorming. So I've got some paper pads, got some color markers. We're going to hopefully try to work to develop a sense from you all what your priorities are, where you see things lining up, and what you're interested in. And then we'll spend some time having an open dialogue and talking about next steps. I would invite, if there's any questions along the way, to not hesitate to ask them while we're on that topic. If we feel like we get into the weeds, we can maybe push on. But I think if there's a question that needs some clarification in your mind, it'd be better to go forward from there. I'd like to start off first with some updates, and we're going to talk about 4 different updates to this. One is where we're at with what really brought us here today, which was the Middle Point landfill's capacity and pending closure date. We'll talk about that. Then we'll try to get some feedback from you on your field trip. I know you went to PhD Energy, a gasification technology. Most of you, I think, went. Any discussion on that we want to have? There are some other field trips that we think you might benefit from. The Huntsville Waste Energy Facility in Alabama may be open to, they're a client of ours and we know the folks there. They might be open if you want to see a conventional waste energy facility locally. There's some other conversion technologies that also may be of interest to you that have facilities and or people locally that could talk. One is Waste Away and one is Proton Power. And lastly, we'll give you some update on our public outreach efforts. So Jeff from Triad, who's working with us on as a local engineer, was going to give us a little update on the Middle Point landfill.
All right. Good evening. As you can see on the next slide, okay, where we kind of stand right now, we basically have an estimate, a public record from 2016 that at that time in March, Republic estimated the life at about 11 years. It puts us at about 2027 for the last of the life. Now, in public meetings with state officials and my discussions with the state officials, they indicated that it may be down to 8 years. Now, the grades as in place are what they are. It's what the concern is how much is being deposited. Like in 2015, it was estimated around 3,500 tons. This year, there's been not a report to the state yet. That report's due in about a month. But the concern of the state is that they may be taking in much more on the volume side. So if they are, then that means that that date creeps up closer toward us. So we will wait for the official report again from Republic in about a month. And that is about where we are.
There is, I know there's some dialogue going on right now between the state and Republic on potential changes to the volume. And all we'll say really is that may affect the closure date. That may be sooner than 8 years. It may not. And one thing that, if that does become sooner, it makes, sort of the need to get something in place a lot, more imperative, changes your outlook as to how much time you have to be able to get something long range and plan, et cetera. So it's something that, we're going to continually monitor with the state, Republic. I know Republic's here today to see, but it's a deadline that we need to track and you need to track so you know when you need to have an alternate in place. So you had a field trip. I see some folks there. Is there anything that from the field trip that you feel needs to be discussed, or anything you want to, any questions that were raised after the field trip from a technology perspective, or potential applicability to Rutherford County?
The facilities we saw down there, and taking into account what they actually take there, what percentage goes into our landfill of that? If we were to create a facility like that, what percentage would it cut out of what is going into the landfill today?
Well, right now, that facility, I believe, takes sludge, wood chips, and tires.
Right.
So I don't have them right on top of my head, but I would say no more than 10 to 15% is probably what you're looking at if you could maximize everything going to something like that. Right. I think that right now you don't have a lot. I mean, you have wood diversion programs, you have tire diversion programs here, and you have sludge that's some that's going into the landfill that could go there. So, it is a technology that can manage a piece. There's very few technologies that can manage all. I mean, landfills are one of those things that can manage most all. It's a big hole and you fill it up. But these type of technologies are right now that's applicable to a certain waste stream, portion of the waste stream.
I think I heard him say that tires and wood and sludge was the extent of what they took now, and there's not a lot of other options with respect to what they can take in that kind of operation, are there?
Well, it depends. You'll see some gasification companies say that they can gasify anything. You've had facilities planned and permitted in the United States that have tried to identify ways to gasify municipal solid waste, but to date, none have been built. We will show a gasification facility that's been built up in Canada, in Edmonton, by a company called Enerchem. They use a front-end processing, though, to prepare the waste and to remove certain items and to get it into a specification that can be better gasified. And that is a commercial operation. Right now, we don't know what the economics are. It's all private money. It's funny money from the standpoint of really trying to know where things are. So when you see our slide, we have a lot of question marks when it comes to the economics of these. But we do think that there's a role for gasification on targeted pieces of the waste stream and or prepared fuels. But there's not, there's not a technology that can handle, more than really these targets. And they're smart to keep their target, to what they know they can manage.
So one question related to that is at the plant, they were a great host because they converted the fuel to power ultimately and consumed it right there at the wastewater plant.
Right.
What do you think our potential is for finding hosts like that can consume the end product of the utility that's produced from that, whether it's power or some biofuel or whatever it is? What do you think our potential is for finding hosts like that?
Well, I think we have started to look at some energy mapping in the county to know where some of the larger energy consumers are, and obviously they're central in the city areas. We believe that there is the ability to create sort of an energy park concept as part of an industrial development zone type of process where you can create a park that says we can, not only create sort of an environmental benefit area where you're taking in waste to create these fuels, but then using that stuff as steam. If you can find a steam off-taker, that is, a tremendous benefit from the standpoint of cost versus electricity. We haven't identified any, win-win thing here in this county yet that says that if you can create energy, there's a huge demand for it. Plus, we have fairly cheap energy right now in electricity in the county. So,
going back to the percentage, the 10% figure that you quoted, I was reading in the report that I guess Triad did for Metro, and for pyrolysis, which I thought was the kind of plant that they've got at Lebanon. That may be wrong, but also for a lot of others, it says that they could accept up to 86% of municipal solid waste. Is that, what would those figures be? Most of the figures that I saw in this particular report were 2/3 to 100% for incineration, for instance. What would that figure be based on, and why would it be so different?
Well, I don't know specific reference. Pyrolysis is not applicable to municipal solid waste generally. Pyrolysis is best applied to things such as tires or plastics and things like that, where you can, almost demolecularize something and create a new product out of it. The number sounds high, to be honest. Nothing against Triad. I think that pyrolysis applicable to 80% is not something that we would think is reasonable. There is no commercial pyrolysis facility in the United States or in North America or probably in South America, maybe not in the world, that's really doing municipal solid waste. All of the pyrolysis facilities are usually a targeted piece of the waste stream, and I don't think that when you
like the one in Lebanon.
Yeah, and actually that's gasification. That's not pyrolysis. It's a little slightly different. Think of pyrolysis as more of a microwave versus a high temperature, gasification type of system. But it's, these technologies right now are not applicable to the full MSW stream.
That was my other question. With the installation in Lebanon being so recent and so unique. Are there other things? This report was done in December 2015, and some of the materials that we're reading are that old and some of them older. But it got me wondering how many of these things that there's always a tag that says there are no full-scale commercial plants operating in the U.S. at this time, how many of those are no longer accurate?
4 years ago, we said, if you really want to find out the future of pyrolysis or gasification, talk to us in 4 years. If you want to talk to us about the future of gasification and pyrolysis now, talk to us in 4 years. Right now, actually, a lot of plants have actually gone away. There is still some biofuels facilities being considered, some planned. The specifics are, very privately, tightly held. There was a facility in Indian River, Florida, by a Spanish company, Ineos. It was supposed to be our second North American biofuels facility created out of MSW. The facility was built, pretty much, built, and then they started testing it on waste, and really they got it through biomass, but they could not get it working on MSW. So that has gone away. So we have one facility in North America that's doing MSW, and it's only a processed MSW, which is Enerchem. So I think that, it's anyone's guess. People, there's a lot of technologies out there, and I think they do have good technology, but, garbage is not homogeneous. It is, and it's changing. The waste stream keeps changing. In order to get these things to work, it does need to be processed. It does need to be specific pieces of the waste stream that you target. And it's very expensive. And one of the things we don't know is how expensive. Mm-hmm. Nobody's willing to tell us really what it's going to cost commercially, because there are no commercial operating facilities right now.
So I know that a lot of the waste energy plants are international. There's several in Japan and some in Europe.
We have almost 80 waste energy plants in the U.S.
But I'm assuming that they have diverted the stream and...
Well, there's different kinds of waste energy, and we'll talk about that today. There's what I'll call conventional waste energy, which is either an RDF or processed fuel into energy, or mass burn. And we have an example here that we'll go through in Palm Beach County, Florida, which recently did a major expansion. And then there's conversion technologies, which is what we're talking about here, which is the type of PHG energy is more of a conversion technology. It's not your traditional. So there is a lot of waste energy facilities that are operating. They're operating generally well. They're power plants, like in many power plants. The Huntsville facility I mentioned before in Alabama is a waste energy facility. It takes garbage, it transforms it into energy by combustion and controlled emissions, and it's a well-running machine. So that technology is available. It is not cheap. It typically favors high density, high tipping fees, areas that are don't have room for landfills, or are really desiring to, by policy or otherwise. Connecticut's got like 6 facilities or something like that. So, but they've made a policy at one point that they're not going to landfill. Well, you can't landfill. You got to do something with that material, and waste energy was what they went to.
Just one follow-up related to that. Do you anticipate that we'll have a report with recommendations that consider that it's going to take us a while to get to the point where we're going to actually do whatever it is that's recommended? With technologies like these changing as rapidly as they are, will the recommendations provide us the flexibility and enough information as we move into the future 2, 3, 4 years or more out and make the decisions to invest in one thing or another? Will it have the flexibility for us to take advantage of the technology changes? Just
so when you say that the technologies are changing, yes and no. We've been talking about pyrolysis and gasification for, I'd say, 40 years in this country. And there have been facilities that have done gasification in these companies, come and gone. So that technology is not like it's new. We do think that there's promise to it, because when you look at the price of biofuels, which is where these facilities go to, they go to liquid fuels. They go to ethanol, they go to hydrogen, they go to things that have high value compared to electricity right now, which is in the 2 to 4 cents per kilowatt hour. It's not worth a lot. So when you convert that instead to $3 a gallon ethanol, when you look at that conversion, it's a lot better on a dollar per ton basis, what you get out of a ton of garbage to how much money you can get, but that cost to get it there is not, done. So if flexibility is a priority, then flexibility can be built into your system. If you go down a path where you make a major financial commitment to a technology, you're probably not going to have as much flexibility. If you take sort of a lower technology approach and say we're going to look at other technologies, or that can be part of the consideration. So I think these are the type of things that we're going to have to talk about. What are the priorities? Do you want to keep your doors open down the line? Are you comfortable if there's a technology you want to choose right now, or is the path more something you want to have that ability going on? I mean, one thing about garbage systems, you plan for say 20 years, maybe even 40 years. During that time, things are going to keep changing. You always have to adjust and recalibrate. But there are counties that have made 20-year commitments and are at the end of their 20-year period, and now they're looking at something new. And we'll talk about one of those examples here today too. But I think we're trying to get you on a path that is going to take care of your problem, provides the goals that you want, addresses the fact that you're losing where you can go now, and obviously the economic impacts of that have to be addressed.
One other comment, if I can, and that's if you can address it, coming out of the PHP visit, one kind of borrowing on the sustainability world where they use the triple bottom line when they evaluate projects and initiatives, which is the economic, the environmental, and the social aspect. And certainly I think that applies here. If you look at the PHP, I mean, they had the economics that were working for them, but that was a local economics because they were diverting power that they would be purchasing for the wastewater plant. Right. Didn't have a lot of infrastructure costs. They weren't relying totally on a market to sell. They were going to consume what they made. Right. And, of course, it was scaled to fit, 32 tons per day of trash would produce 400 kW, what have you. So I know a lot of the things that we're going to talk about, we don't know the economics, but obviously we're going to learn more about the economics, and I know it'll always depend on some of those other factors, right, some of the scalability and applications and so forth. But the environmental, we're all looking for the environmental improvements over landfill. So everything, that we're going to look at is going to be a step or 2 or 10 potentially above landfilling. The part I want to ask about is the social part, because the social aspects are, this is the not in my backyard type things, and we're typically looking at things like smell, odor, maybe some permitting type things, but also the presence of, trash trucks, and traffic and things like that. So, for instance, at PHP, the gasification socially is fine from a smell perspective. That's really not an issue, gasification. So some of these other technologies we talk about, if you'll kind of speak to that, because I don't know all the processes, but if one requires incineration and it's going to have a real permitting or a burning or something like that, that would be good if you could kind of highlight.
I'll tell you what, when we go through the different technologies, we'll try to touch on the 3 aspects that you're mentioning: the social, the environmental, and the economic. I can tell you that we worked with communities that tried to look at triple bottom lines, and that economic circle, when you look at the 3 circles, that economic circle ends up being a lot bigger than people realize. But the idea of trying to balance out the 3 priorities is obviously something that, again, we're talking about. One of the things we want to come out of this too is how do you want to look at these from an evaluation standpoint? So we'll try to touch on some of those, but I'll try to touch on some of your questions with respect to the social side when we get through them.
Thanks.
All right. So I mentioned to you before, there are some other field trips possible. I would encourage you to sort of experience as much as you can as part of this process. These are a couple of the facilities. The one that's commercially operating in a full commercial capacity is the Huntsville. The other 2 are more of a, I'll say, pilot type of process where they can show you the technology. It's not on a commercial scale the way it would solve, Rutherford County's solid waste needs, but could apply for a portion of it. It all depends on what you're looking for, and I think it's always good to see different things. Okay, I want to just pass it over to on the outreach, sort of what we're doing on the outreach side of things.
Thank you. I'm Dave Cooley Public Strategies, and I'll be very brief. To this point, we've really just been working with the local news media, both in Rutherford County and in the greater Nashville area, to highlight your work and outline the baseline messages that change is inevitable, that change is going to cost taxpayers, and really moving into the work that you will do to evaluate the various options, which you'll hear a lot more about tonight. We will move from that to the recommendations that go forward, and then from there to more of the general public outreach, where we've identified some 16,000 households in this general area that we'll be communicating with, both through conventional media but also through social media. We have launched we have launched a Facebook site, and working with both the city and the county with social media outreach. Interestingly, a number of the city and county departments have great networks and reach a lot of the citizens in Murfreesboro and Rutherford County. That's posted on the Renewal Rutherford, and also the two mayors have done the Murfreesboro Storytellers piece that I think has been running with John Hood for some time. This will start in March, this particular edition, and from there, if you have any specific needs on outreach that we should talk about, please just pick up the phone or call us, or we'll come and meet with you. And Paul, in particular, we want to connect with the chamber as we start looking toward some public input after the third workshop. Any questions? Great, thank you.
All right, thank you, Dave. All right, so we wanted to, again, sort of go back. We presented some information on the first workshop, sort of try to define what are we trying to solve, what problem are we solving from the standpoint of a new system. And we wanted to dig that down into that a little bit for you so you can get a sense for how we came up with some of the numbers and that sort of thing. So we're projecting your waste disposal needs going forward on a methodology. And that methodology looks at population growth. We looked at the city of Murfreesboro and the county differently. I think the city has a slightly higher growth rate historically and projecting to be a little bit faster growth than the county. We look back as to how much waste was generated, usually per person, and then we combine those two, and we end up with a amount of waste that needs to be managed each year. So just, these are some of the assumptions that went into the methodology. Some of the populations, the growth rates between 2.3 for the county and 3% for the city. Looking at around 260,000 tons were disposed of by just the county and within Rutherford County at the Middle Point landfill. More so that came in from out of county. And we did sort of say, and this is one that's debated in this field, as to whether or not people's behaviors are going to change. Over the last 30 years, they haven't changed much. We've done a lot to change behaviors for people, but we still generate about the same amount of waste that we did, 30 years ago. Just throwing out where the waste is picked up by in the county, almost 2/3 come from the private haulers. So what is managed within the county, the city and the county only manage about 1/3. The rest of it is by private haulers, and you can sort of see the different breakdowns between the recycling centers of the county, the curbside program by the city for garbage, and C&DD brush for the county and the city. And when you look at the waste and you break it down into areas, we did sort of break it down into a few understandable components. One, and these are components that are potentially targetable, if the way we see it from the standpoint of management. Recycling is about 1/3. You have about 1/3 of the material is truly easily recyclable, capturable just through single-stream recycling programs. That's your bottles and cans and your papers. you've got about another quarter of the waste stream is organics. That's food, yard debris, and you have construction and demolition debris. You know, your household renovations, new construction, demolition of buildings is another about 7 to 10%. And that gets you to about almost 2/3 of the waste stream is what we think, you know, fairly suitable for management. If you can truly manage it, that gets you a long way. You'll hear people talk about zero waste advocacy, and you know, we definitely subscribe to that as a nice goal and a really good way to approach solid waste management. But from a realistic standpoint, the waste stream is not conducive to zero waste. We've got a lot of materials out there that are very difficult to manage. We have composite plastics. We've got paper that's contaminated. We've got food that's tough to separate from the packaging and to make it a really recoverable. And we've got a lot of you know, metal things that are all mixed in with other stuff. It's very difficult to actually separate out. So we think, based on this, that, you know, if we can target about 70% of the waste stream here, we'll probably be in good shape.
Can we go back one slide?
Yep.
Not that one, but one prior to that.
Hold on. There. This one?
Yes.
Or this one?
That one. I just want to ask a question. That's 282,000 tons total. Last meeting we were talking about 80,000 tons, the 42,000 and the 38,000 combined that were controlled. That's in that 282.
No. Oh, yes, that's in the 282. That's correct.
Right. So would you explain what you mean by the controlled? Because my understanding, that would be the municipal waste from the county and the city that's has zero tipping fees associated with it. And if my thinking is correct, the other 200,000, while it is generated from the county, but it comes from the different haulers and so forth, it would have tipping fees associated with that. Is that correct?
That's correct. The free waste disposal comes to the county through the recycling centers, and to the city for the waste that gets disposed of from the city. And that is, you know, as you mentioned, the around, you know, 80,000 tons or whatever that may be.
So is that basically the non-brown part of that?
Yeah, except for the C&D, the brush. But yes.
Okay. Thank you.
So all of these don't pay the tipping fees. All of that.
Any other questions? Oops, geez. Get my direction here. Okay, so we're looking at over a 20-year planning horizon, say 2015, 2035, a fairly substantial growth rate of waste in the county. Again, just what the county generates. And the plan that we were looking at is not something that just addresses what the county currently manages and the city currently manages, but what's generated in Rutherford County. Doesn't mean you have to actively manage it, but at least you need to be aware of what it is in case you do want to manage it. It's to grow from about 300,000 tons to about 450,000 tons in 2035 is what we're looking at. The top line is population. So it's actually 280 to about 450. And these are just a breakdown of sort of where the counties, recycling centers, how much waste goes into each one. Almost, I'd say over 50% is managed by 4. There's a lot of smaller ones, though. So you do see that, we do have pockets where there's a lot of activity in the county system and a lot of that's outside in smaller areas. A map, again, just of the infrastructure of the county's recycling centers, 16 of them. And, all right, so what are the alternatives? What are the options that the county can look at? And so we sort of put these into a number of categories. And, again, there's different ways to look at this. We're going to throw out there the one option is that you don't necessarily change what you're doing from the standpoint of how you manage things, but your disposal outlet changes. And so that's what we call direct haul. You take it to somewhere directly from here. If there's a facility that's within reasonable distance, and we'll show a map about that too. That's the go it alone approach, where the county and the city sort of do whatever they need to do to get rid of their waste, and that is an option. That's not it may not be the best option, but it is an option. Other options, either programmatically or from a technology standpoint, are to focus on reducing the amount of waste. Source reduction is on the top of the hierarchy from the EPA. I think we may have talked about that in the past, where really focusing on not producing in the first place is better than having to manage it after the fact. And there's ways to do that. There's financial ways to do that. There's mandates that they try to do that, as well as education. There's different collection approaches that you can take, whether it be targeting your residential, your commercial, or the public, collecting and taking it to a recycling center the way they do now. So there's changes that could be made that would affect the system going forward on the collection. Landfilling as a technology is, and I would say from an engineering standpoint these days, it is reasonably safe. It's an option. It meets many of the criteria of protecting the public from groundwater contamination as long as they're designed and managed well. It may not be the best option because it does have some factors that we'll talk about in terms of impacts to the community. And from that perspective, there's a couple options with the landfill. One is, do you want to engage Republic in looking at, in the state, and looking at, keeping Middle Point open? Is there a way to do that? There may be. Do you want to look at a new facility in this county, inciting a new facility? Or do you want to look at out-of-county landfills? There are some, not a lot in this area, but there are some that could be considered. Transfer stations may be needed depending on where you go with the waste. If it's not directly hauled, you usually have to take it somewhere to make the economics work by putting it in from collection vehicles into over-the-road vehicles, like a tractor trailer, basically. And you've changed the economics dramatically in terms of the hauling cost by doing that. So when the hauling distance gets beyond 40 miles or something of that nature, 30, 40 miles, it often makes sense to put it in a larger vehicle and go from there. And so a transfer station could be a way to look at as part of your system. Then there's technologies that focus more on getting the materials out of the waste and into some type of productive use. We'll use the words materials recovery facility or MRFs. Those are generally referred to from source-separated recyclables like bottles and cans and paper. That's what we generally apply that term to. That may or may not be needed here. We'll show some map of where some of those are. The transfer station could be for both solid waste and recyclables, by the way. You can look at organic technologies such as anaerobic digestion, which is what we call AD, or composting. We'll speak to that. And MWP is mixed waste processing. So many of the technologies, and some that are that you would go to, like waste away, is a mixed waste processing technology that creates a fuel out of the material. That's a technology that has had some fits and starts in this country. In Montgomery, Alabama recently, you may have heard there was a facility built, started to operate, and then due to recycling prices has since shut down. So there, the technology we think is robust from the standpoint of being able to manage these systems. It just needs to be part of an integrated system that everything works, including the economics. Then, as we mentioned, there's energy systems. Conventional energy systems such as waste energy, which is typically mass burn, or can be creating a refuse-derived fuel from mixed waste processing to a energy recovery. And then there's the advanced conversion, which we mentioned about gasification and pyrolysis. So we're going to spend a little bit of time going through each one. And again, if there's questions, we'll go, try to answer them. We showed this slide last time too, and I just wanted to sort of lay this out too from the standpoint of technology. Technology follows other things. It follows what you set up as your policies. It follows what you set up as programs to manage waste, and then eventually you end up with something to manage. And the technology is used to manage that something that's left. But how you get that material into a system, and then what you do with it to try to fine tune it, then goes to a technology. So When you look at your systems going forward, you need to be thinking about the type of policies you want to set forth. These could be diversion policies. These could be, whether it's a no landfill, yes landfill, zero waste to landfill, zero waste in general, whatever. Those are all policies, and more like philosophies. Those will determine the type of programs you put in place. They will eventually determine the waste that come out and the technologies that are applicable to them. So technology is only one piece of the puzzle. And this is just to give you a sense for what type of technologies are out there. I think these are all 2016 numbers. We've got a lot of curbside recycling programs in the U.S., a lot of transfer stations, a lot of composting facilities, typically geared towards yard waste, leaves, and other yard waste, and a lot of landfills. The type of waste energies I mentioned, we have about 80. It's actually dropped off a little bit. It was a few more a couple of years ago. We've had a couple shut down. So there's a lot of different technologies out there. And just to give you a sense for who's using what across this country right now. All right, so let's take just a minute and talk about some direct haul. This is a map showing a 20-mile radius around the edge of Rutherford County. And the key down here, I think I'm going to try this color thing here. This here, there you go. See that? That's your key. That shows you what the little square boxes are landfills, the diamonds are transfer stations. The middle point landfill is obviously in there, and the National Waste Esteem Facility, that's sort of outside there. It's not taking waste anymore. Used to. And materials recovery facilities such as, which is the MRFs. So you can see there are some facilities that are in the area. Now, are these facilities available to you? Does it make sense for you to go to them? If that is something you wanted to look at, we could look at that. I think that from the standpoint of I would say in general, this would not be a preferred approach because it's going to limit if one facility goes out, to try to find and move everything to another facility. So you are limited. If you're a private hauler and you own your own facility, then you may make the choice to go to your own transfer station. But from a county perspective, unless you own some of these facilities, it's going to limit your options. But what we wanted to present to you is that within a reasonable driving distance, 20 miles is probably the furthest you'd want to go away from the county on a direct haul with your truck. There are some options. Source reduction. So source reduction is more of a policy-driven type of thing. It is often focused by education, teaching people to reuse things, make different purchasing habits, repair items, donate things that are still usable to charities, etc. But others have taken attempts to manage things such as banning plastic bags. Not a big piece of the waste stream, but a problem from some community standpoints. So, there are communities in California that have, banned the bag. And it's a way for source reduction. People don't, get bags that way. You can make things more expensive by taxing, items to make them. The whole idea on the returnable bottles at one point was you put a number on it and you would send it back. Now, those returnable bottles are no longer being really reused. They used to be reused. Now they're just being recycled on many of the bottle bills. Grass cycling is an example where you're telling people, cut your grass and leave it there. Don't pick it up, so you have to manage it. And backyard composting is a way to keep stuff out of the waste stream. So these are just some ideas. To really affect change, and to put a lot of these programs that we have just a roughly, it's $2 to $4 a household per month is what you'd have to think about tacking onto your bill if you really want to go after these hardcore. It can be any range in there. And after a few years, once you get them going, they can be cheaper. And the diversion impacts for these, unfortunately, are not significant, in part because people just don't like to change their behaviors, and it takes a lot for people to change their behaviors. Obviously, education is key. Legislation is important if you want to do this. Obviously, the legislation is a challenge all in itself, so we definitely would always recommend social reduction be part of any type of program, but how far you want to take it and the costs associated with it, there are challenges to it. We do, for each one of these, we're going to give you an example of what some folks are doing. So Portland, Oregon is a very progressive solid waste city. They have done a lot of things. They have the bottle bill, as I mentioned, which is more of a tax. They have a plastic bag ban, and they do a lot with their education programs to try to target different things that can be done. And stopping junk mail, for example, is a way to reduce solid waste. And so there's information at the bottom of a website if you'd like to go check it out further. All right, so collection. So, as part of a system, the way you collect waste will affect what you can do with it. And there's different ways to affect change in behaviors depending on how you collect it. And this can be from the standpoint of residential. We often look at residential and commercial slightly differently because businesses have different needs than residents do. And then there's other items too that need to be managed separately outside that waste stream. Often yard waste needs to be managed slightly outside the waste stream, as well as bulky waste. We're throwing out there that one of the ways that you manage waste in the county is to collect it. So just even having a curbside collection program, which you don't have for everybody. I mean, I think you have services that are offered, but not everybody subscribes to collection services. So some people will take their waste directly to a recycling center to get rid of it. We throw out the idea of PAYT. That's called pay as you throw. So that's a volume-based system where you either pay on how many bags you throw away or you pay on the size of container that you're given. Some communities will offer 2 or 3 sizes of container, a cart, 32, 64, 96, and you pay cheaper for the 32. So people that want to recycle more, you give them a big recycling cart, 96-gallon cart, and a 64-gallon garbage bin. They're more apt, theoretically, to try to put the thing in the right bin, especially if they have to pay more if they're going to get a bigger bin. So that's the philosophy on that. We threw out $15 to $40 per household. That's the all-in collection cost to run curbside programs. From the commercial standpoint, it varies depending on the bin size, number of frequencies, and that sort of thing. You can affect a lot of change in recycling by offering curbside service. If you give someone a cart at their house and you say throw everything in there versus you got to lug it down to a recycling center, you will change how much waste actually gets put into that cart. And it's been shown that you can get fairly dramatic improvements by going to a curbside service. So if you really want to affect recycling, do you want to offer that service? That's a question. You don't have to answer that right now. And you can affect that also on the commercial side. Commercials usually do things on what makes sense economically for them. But sometimes the service has to be provided. And one of the things you can require is anyone operating in the county, if they offer recycling collection services, they have to offer recycling services. These are policy options that you could entertain. It takes a while to get collection systems underway, but it's within your time frame, a couple years usually, but you can design and implement a system. It is always best to engage your local haulers in those discussions to make sure it works well. Not all haulers are going to be receptive to butting into the business of affecting their services. It's not cheap. $15 to $40 a household per month is, if somebody doesn't have it, they're not going to want to pay for it. So not everybody wants to pay for a curbside service. These are just some examples of what curbside setouts look like. You can have 3 carts. Usually the green is vegetative waste or organics, so that can be yard waste or food waste or both. Black is usually your trash bin, and blue is usually recycling. Yard waste can be picked up in craft bags or the fiber bags. And the one on the right there in Austin they've recently gone to a residential food waste collection. So the green cart is their yard waste cart, And the little pail there is something they give to all the residents to put in the kitchen. And so when people are, get done with their kitchen scraps, they put it in the pail, dump the pail into the big thing with their yard waste, and it gets picked up. It's a service that's rolled out in Austin. And this is a little bit about their system. And you can, go through and just sort of see as an example of, sort of a fairly sophisticated collection program. And there's a website at the bottom.
I have a question about those programs. Where they're implemented, how good is compliance when it comes to separating things between bins, particularly in places where you're charged more for the garbage bin than for the recycling bin?
Depends on how much more you're charging. Oftentimes, recycling is going to be a free adder. So you put the 96-gallon cart, and it's free, and then you charge on the volume of waste. If you make it too expensive, you'll get too much contamination going into your 96-gallon cart. One of the big debates that's come across in this country is the fact that we've used to recycle things individually. We used to take our glass here and our paper here, and our bottles and cans over there. Now we do what's called single stream, and throw them all in one container. And the public loves it, and you really get a bump in participation. You get bump in people actually being able to put stuff into containers. It makes it really convenient for them. But you do end up getting a lot more contamination to the point of some programs get anywhere from 10 to 25% contamination. It can be a real problem. So that's where there's a lot of effort needed on education, targeted education. We have a client, Fort Worth, Texas, that has what they call the Blue Crew. Once a route, or they have a team that goes out in front of every route. They'll lift the lids on the blue cans, and if they see contamination, they'll note it, and then they send education materials to the families to say, "We're there, we saw it. Here's what we saw." So people sort of prying into people's business, if you will, but it was a targeted education to try to change behavior when they see something. So the more you make it difficult, the more likely people are going to. It's like if you raise garbage prices too high, people will dump stuff alongside the road. That's what happens with illegal dumping. So part of the reason of making a system affordable and convenient is so people don't dump stuff alongside the road. And I think that's the same sort of philosophy when you look at trying to divert things from one container to another. All right, let's talk a few minutes about landfills. Landfills are controlled by federal design standards. The EPA has what they call Subtitle D standards, which define the liner systems needed, the groundwater protection programs needed for that. There's also regulations that define how much, once a certain amount of gas is created in a landfill, when you start to have to collect that gas. The two biggest issues with landfills from an environmental standpoint are usually leachate, what comes to the water that may leach out of the landfills. In the old days when landfills were not lined, the water would go into the groundwater. Now, today, usually there's one or two liner systems, and they're very good at keeping the groundwater clean of the waste. But it does take, the right design and the right operations to make that happen. So what you have to collect that material and then send it to a wastewater treatment plant. Landfill gas is usually a big issue. I know it's been an issue in this county because with landfill gas comes odor. Methane is the biggest piece of landfill gas. Almost 50% of landfill gas is methane. The other half is carbon dioxide, mostly. And you know what? Methane and carbon dioxide, they don't smell. Neither one of them. So when almost all of the gas that comes out of landfill doesn't smell. But there's a little bit of it, that is super stinky, especially hydrogen sulfide. So it doesn't take much of landfill gas of that gas to make things smell. So, some of the social issues associated with landfills that are usually brought up are that one is that they're visually unappealing. Not many landfills, look good. Second is obviously odors and dust. When trucks are running up and down, they're creating dust. There's usually dust that coming off a landfill. There's blowing litter. Usually you have trash screens around landfills to catch stuff, but when trucks are either delivering waste or dropping off waste, there's litter that's associated with it. Property values are often impacted, associated with landfills. The trucks coming to the landfill, that's trucks. It's an industry. So there's truck traffic. But there's benefits too. I mean, I used to run a landfill. I can tell you that, such as Middle Point, they can have positive economic benefits for the community if there are benefits given. Right now, you have fairly substantial benefits, financially from the Middle Point landfill, and that has kept your costs down. And so when people do look at that cost benefit, that's often considered what's called a host community benefit, and that's what you have, is a host community benefit. That is often intended to try to compensate the community economically for the issues surrounding that. But landfills are probably, one of the bigger challenges of, from the standpoint of, the environmental performance. It's easier to manage the environmental performance of the other type of systems out there. But from a cost standpoint, they're going to be one of your cheapest options, especially at scale. In most landfills, we have 1,900 landfills, I think, in the U.S. was our number. We used to have a lot more, but now they're smaller. I mean, they're bigger, and we have got a lot less. So we've gone to the mega landfill region, and you're a fairly sizable landfill from the standpoint of landfills. And when you get to the economies of that type of scale, usually you can get the costs into a fairly competitive standpoint compared to other technologies, and you'll see that going forward. There's not much recycling that happens at a landfill. You may have some drop-offs. You may recover some things at the landfill. You do oftentimes collect the gas, usually to do some beneficial activities with the gas, create electricity from it. It is a combustible gas. And so from the standpoint of implementation, we mentioned the three options. Expanding Middle Point, there's even been discussions that, could the county landfill right next door, somewhere to be combined with the Middle Point landfill to create capacity within the county. Do you want to look at new in-county landfill or out-of-county landfill? And I can tell you finding a site is not going to be without its significant challenges in this county. And it has, siting a landfill is not something anyone wants to go through as a challenge. But, they are a big part of our disposal waste stream. We actually dispose of almost 2/3 of our waste in this country through landfilling, if not more. And so that is, it's a big part of our infrastructure still. This is just an example of a landfill and some of the, hype that goes around when you talk about the landfills. They compare it to size of buildings, et cetera. And this is something that came out of the DEP's website up in Pennsylvania. Now, we took a map of a 100-mile radius of Murfreesboro to look at options for landfills. And there are quite a few if you look at this map. Again, the key down here down the corner here. The landfills are the blue squares. There you go. So you do apparently have a lot of landfills within, a 100-mile radius, which could be a drivable distance from the county. And this is the list of those landfills. The Middle Point landfill being the one at the top. And what I'd say is that there seems to be a lot of landfills, but in terms of capacity as to how much they're taking in, the Middle Point landfill takes a little bit over 1 million tons a year, about 1.1 million tons a year of waste a year. The Cedar Ridge landfill, which is sort of the second largest receiver of waste, is about 500,000 tons. And if you take all the rest of them combined, I think it's less than 1 million tons of capacity. So the two landfills at the top, are 2/3 of the amount of waste that is in there. And when the Middle Point capacity is no longer available to the county, it's going to have a significant impact on the region. So while there's a lot of landfills, there's not a lot of landfills with the type of capacity that Middle Point will have. So not only is it going to affect you, it's going to affect a lot of other people within the county. But when it comes to looking at out-of-county landfills, there are those you may even you may have to go further out to look at landfills. And we just looked at a 100-mile radius to give you a sense for who's out there, what kind of capacity they have. But keep in mind that the bottom of the top two is less than the top one, actually, that's out there. Transfer stations, as I mentioned before, a transfer station is an enclosed building where you take it from a collection vehicle into a larger vehicle. The reason you do that is simply to improve the economics of transportation. You can use transfer stations to also recover materials. You can use them to reduce wear and tear on your trucks. When your truck goes over a concrete floor versus a landfill, where they're going to run over, ruts and metal pieces, you're going to do a lot less damage to your tires than you are if you're on a concrete floor. We sort of said this was like to be an in-county facility. If you did a transfer station, you'd probably want to put one in the county to serve your county. When you look at the cost, we put an all-in cost of around $50 to $70 a ton compared to the cost we showed you for the landfill. About a third of that cost is in building and operating the transfer station. Another third of it is about transporting the waste to a facility, and another third is about the disposal piece. So those are all rough numbers, but it gives you a sense for what you're looking at in terms of costs. Now, you can do some recycling improvements at transfer stations. That's an option. But usually, unless you're doing something very sophisticated and mechanized, you're not going to need a lot. But you can get some cardboard, some metals, and it's a way to at least provide that opportunity. They could, one of the things we've talked about is that the county has a landfill site now that may be amenable to a transfer station. That's the first thing that comes into our mind in terms of a potential site would be its existing C&D landfill. You do need to make sure that you have enough waste to make it economical. With just the cities in the county, 80,000 tons a year, it's borderline. That's not a lot. You may be able to make it work, but it's not going to be the most economical as well as you had one that helped serve the whole 300,000 tons roughly of waste that's in the county. You'd have a much better operation at that kind of capacity. And that would take about 2 years to develop from the standpoint, maybe more, depending on the permitting side of things. From the environmental side of things, you're now in an enclosed building. The waste is not exposed to the elements. Usually there's dust and/or odor controls on the transfer station floors. You usually don't have the bird populations. You don't have the visual. You usually don't have as much odors. You still have trucks. So there are still impacts on that. But the environmental procedures, because you're not disposing waste there, you're only moving from one vehicle to another, it's typically a much less impact on the public. This is an example of one of our clients' transfer stations in Florida. The floor there on the side shows that they are not only transferring waste, but they also transfer recyclables. They'll tip out recyclables, put them into larger trucks so they can get them to their MRFs that need to be managed. They just look like a regular sort of a industrial building. So diversion and processing. I like to throw flow charts out there just to confuse you and to make things look really complex, but it is complex. There's a lot of things that could be done, and this is all options that are sort of post-collection and post-transfer. And we threw this out there just to give you a sense for lots of different things that can be done with this. So the description on processing really depends on what you're targeting. MRFs, as I mentioned before, materials recovery facilities, are typically for recycling materials separated out. Usually those facilities, actually we used to have a lot more of them. Again, we've got a lot less of them in the country, but they're bigger because we need economies of scale. Off the top of my head, do you have enough recyclables in this county to justify a MRF? I'd probably say no, but you need somewhere to be able to take it to, so you need to make sure there's capacity somewhere for you to handle this. If you do collect it, it needs to go to a MRF in order to be separated before it can go to markets. Diversion processing for organics can be either anaerobic digestion or composting. On mixed waste, you can take in solid waste and create different things out of it. One of the biggest things you create out of mixed waste processing, besides recovering some recyclables, is creating fuel. and I think that is where the fuel can be delivered to not only conventional waste energy facilities, but also cement kilns are a potential market for fuel coming out of mixed waste processing. But there's only, I think, one cement kiln in this region that we identified in our search. They're not cheap compared to landfilling. MRFs in general, although the material has value, it's going to take you $75 to $100 to process it. And depending on the markets, you may get some of that back. You may get all of it back. You may not. So a lot of the private industry is saying right now that you need to make sure we get paid for our processing, and if there's value, we'll share the value. But we're not going to go at risk for the processing materials, and that's a policy that's come out really from the national recycling companies right now. Composting, depending on what it is, $25 to $30 a ton. If it's food waste, it may be a lot more, but yard waste processing is usually fairly economical. Anaerobic digestion does have a cost to it, but also creates a value from the standpoint of a gas. You do get methane out of anaerobic digestion, which has some value. And mixed waste processing does have a cost, and if you can find markets for the materials coming out of it, it can be an economical opportunity. There are recycling improvements of these different technologies. I'd say for the most part, these technologies have MRF technologies and mixed waste technologies and anaerobic digestion technology are usually fairly, benign from the standpoint of their impacts on the community as long as they're managed well. Composting, on the other hand, can have a major impact. Especially if it takes sludge and or food waste, it can have big odors in the community. A lot of food waste composting facilities have had issues from time to time, and many have shut down as a result. Diversion, there's a lot of challenges to making it work from an implementation standpoint. They usually have to have a dedicated delivery stream, so making sure that collection, as I mentioned, matches the technology. You can't build it and they will come sort of technology. You've got to make sure that you've put the systems in place to get the material collected, bring it to the facility, and to make sure it works. And you can usually build these things rather quickly in the time frame that you have, for example. Some examples of technology that's used in MRFs. I won't go through them too much. Optical sorting. We're getting fairly sophisticated to be able to detect different types of plastic resins, where they can sort resins on or different colors of glass using optics. Organics processing, as we mentioned before, targets a few different items here. You have, WWTP is wastewater treatment plant. Obviously, composting and anaerobic digestion. You can take food scraps into these facilities. Wastewater treatment plant is used through incinerators. Do people have them in this part of the world? Where your food disposers in your sinks goes into your, where does that go? It goes to your wastewater treatment plant. That's where your food waste is going when you run it through a food grinder. And all of those are options when it comes to organics management. And the offtakes are either soil amendments through composting, residues, and biogas. And these are some of the feedstocks that are typically for anaerobic digestion, for example. We've seen more success being done with anaerobic digestion with commercial food waste versus residential. It's usually cleaner and bigger capacities and easier to manage than it is for residential. Take a minute on mixed waste processing. This is taking your organics and your municipal solid waste and then putting it into a black box. And the black box is similar to a MRF black box. You have screens, you have magnets, you have optical sorters, you have manual sorters, and you get different things out. You get recyclables. You have organics that are typically screened out. Those are usually anything in the 2-inch minus, so anything less than 2 inches. is often highly organic rich. It's the way it just happens to work out. And you end up with fuels oftentimes. So mixed waste processing does have a way to play a role. Mixed waste processing is coming into the realm of what often people refer to as MBT, or mechanical biological treatment, where you have the mechanical side, which is taking the stuff over 2 inches and separating it into either fuel or recycling, and the biological side, which is that 2-inch minus, which then gets either dried, composted, digested, etc. So that's a technology right now in Germany, for example. You cannot dispose of non-treated organic material, non-treated garbage cannot go into a landfill in Germany. You can't do it. It's against the law. So they have to treat all of the waste before it even goes into a landfill. And right now, they use this type of technology. It's very highly used there, but that's mostly because they can't do that. And so they've tried to create a lot of uses, and they're recovering quite a bit. Over 60% of the waste gets recovered in many of these systems. But you still have 30-40% that doesn't and still requires disposal. In West Virginia, we actually do have a new facility that's come online in Sorga that uses an MBT process. It is I guess there's an acronym for it, the HEBIOT process, that is creating right now SRF, which is solid refuse fuel. In other words, for refuse dry fuel that has been approved by the EPA as an alternative to coal for power plants. And right now they're using it in cement kilns. And they're seeing a value at it. So there is an example of someone who's doing this, at least in the U.S., is creating a material. And traditional waste energy. So on the back end of these things is creating electricity and or steam out of systems. It's oftentimes mass burn, which everything goes into one combustion unit. You first start off with steam usually. You have boilers, create steam. That steam can oftentimes be used as a industrial source, or runs a turbine, or you create hot water, or you create chill water if you use the energy correctly. You also create metals out of the ash, and sometimes you can create the ash as ADC, which is alternate daily cover. Those are you can almost throw anything into those systems from the standpoint of systems. But they're very expensive. $90 to $150 a ton to process waste. Now you get some of that value back in electricity or steam. And so depending on how much steam and electricity you can sell, you can get that into a more manageable tipping fee for your customers. And you do recover some things on the back end from metals. But it depends on how much of that energy you can sell. It costs a lot to build and manage it, and really times, what you can't sell in terms of energy has to be bought by tipping fees.
Is this a modern day version of the old Nashville thermal plant?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
And a back question. You mentioned earlier about a facility, I think it was in Birmingham, that is now shut down.
Montgomery.
Montgomery. Was it a MRF?
That was a mixed waste processing facility.
Mixed use.
Mixed waste processing, yeah.
And it is mothballed because the recyclable market is low and they can't generate enough revenue at this point?
Yes.
Okay.
That's basically it. And this is not unusual to that facility. It's similar to what is happening into regular MRFs these days, where, as I mentioned, it costs you, $50, $70, $80 a ton to process recyclables. And in the past, when recycling markets were pretty robust, you could have a vendor come in and process recyclables oftentimes at no cost to you, because they were getting more than $50, $70 a ton in the value that was coming in the door. So they were making money without charging you anything. And the market has changed to, we're not going to take the risk on the markets, because the markets have been very cyclical, and right now they've had a very low point where China stopped taking a lot of our recyclables, and that created a big loss in marketing ability for our materials, and so the pricing went down from the ability to send it to markets. So the large companies are not taking that risk. And actually, the contract in Montgomery, the technology worked. It actually was part of a regular MRF as well as a dirty MRF. But the price that they had set, in order to make things work, they had to get value out of the recyclables. And when they couldn't get the value of the recyclables, they were losing money, and they just couldn't lose money anymore. So the contract didn't work anymore. Otherwise, the technology worked.
That was a private?
It was a private
company?
Yep. So traditional waste energy, we would say it works. It's demonstrated. You can visit 80 plants around the country. You can visit the one in Alabama and see that working. You can visit them in Florida. I mean, there's ones around here that are, you can visit, see, operate. They have 20 years of history operating. They are financeable. These things have been financed. As long as you can have a system that's going to be financeable, the technology is financeable. And they have been able to demonstrate that they can meet EPA emissions targets for all the different things that are challenged on that. Combustion is a difficult thing to get through the public's perception, though. And so many people think of that if you build a waste energy facility, you're going to hurt recycling, you're going to hurt other priorities. I think that there's an argument to that, but I also think that it has shown that some of the best recycling rates in the country are also those that have integrated systems with waste energy. So we have not seen that proven out, that recycling is hurt by that, but it is something that will come up in the discussions. And what has hurt really waste energy lately has been the prices of electricity. We're in historically low electricity prices, especially with the natural gas glut in the U.S., that is hurting the ability for facilities to either be created or to expand.
Can you remind us why Nashville shut down their thermal transfer plant?
Okay, so I wasn't around at that time, and I believe part of it was that the capital upgrades needed at that facility were going to be too expensive. And it was going to be a political win to shut it down. So between the two, it was determined that when you looked at a new power plant coming online that was natural gas fired, it was going to have a more efficient. It was going to be the worst disposal capacity in Rutherford County for the waste. So there was not a problem getting rid of the waste, and but I think it was part economic and part political.
And did you say that they replaced the power generation or the steam or whatever with a natural gas facility?
That's what I understand. Yeah. Yep.
Just one more comment on the low electricity prices. One of the ways that Lebanon said they made their system that we visited work was that they use the electricity on site, so it's behind the meter.
That's right.
But obviously that's a small scale compared to the scale that we're talking about needing here.
If you can have a direct consumer utilize the electricity, so you're not selling it at wholesale, you're selling it at retail. And let's say retail is 8 cents a kilowatt hour and wholesale is 2, and you can get behind the meter on that, it dramatically changes. The electricity changes. Also, if you can take the steam and feed that steam into a system, you're no longer losing the efficiency in converting to electricity, but you're getting a much higher value on the steam. So some of the most efficient plants out there are ones that create steam and sell the steam directly to either a downtown distribution unit or something that can use it. In Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, right now, they are working to bring I think a dog food, or maybe I think it's some type of food processing facility right next door to the waste energy facility, and they're going to, the waste processing facility is going to, or the food processing facility is going to get a steam output at a good price, and they're going to be able to make a lot better money by selling the steam. So if you can do that at scale, it makes sense. So the fact that they can do it at a wastewater treatment plant, I think it's a wastewater treatment plant, right? That has 24/7 electricity demands too. So they're always aerating. And those aerators take a lot of money. You know, pumps and the aerators takes a lot of electricity. So not only do they have a high price that they pay for it, but they have a lot of need for it. So that's a great way to match up a technology with an output like that. But it's a small scale compared to something that you would need for even the size facility just to handle what you generate here in this county would be probably a pretty big energy consumer.
Is this perceived to be polluting?
Yes.
What does that mean?
It means that if you see a smokestack, you're going to think of pollution. You see a power plant, you're going to think that you're going to have people that are going to be concerned about emissions. Because it's garbage versus, say, natural gas, the perception is going to be there. I think if you compare the emissions of these facilities to other power plants, you'll find that waste energy facilities are right in there with their ability to control emissions. But we also are battling history. We used to have incinerators for solid waste. The incinerators didn't have pollution control, they weren't advanced, and they created a lot of problems with emissions. So there's a lot of history that people can look back on and say, garbage combustion is a real problem. It creates dioxins, it creates mercury.
So these stacks would still have to have scrubbers and all that, just like any other industry would.
Right.
Have to be maintained.
I mean, I think we would say that there's not going to be a solution that doesn't have some element of impact pollution. There's no magic bullet here. And I think, but we're saying that I think the perception of waste energy as a polluting technology is, when you compare it to others, I think there are many benefits to it that, weighing them out, but the perception is still out there. All right. Example we wanted to show was one of the most recent facilities built was a few years ago. I think it came online, a new 3,000 ton a day facility in Palm Beach County, Florida. Wasn't cheap, $670 million to build this thing. $20 million O&M. So these are not cheap. But it does create 130 megawatts, and that's quite a lot of power. For a facility, for a waste energy facility, I should say. Another one that was opened up recently was up in Ontario, Canada, the Durham, York, which is another. These new facilities, the technology keeps advancing with respect to ability to control the combustion conditions as well as air pollution processes, and These are pretty great examples of what the technology is at like today. So there's a couple examples recently of new facilities that have been built, one in Canada, one in the U.S. Websites are at the bottom. So I will talk a little bit about conversion technologies, not a whole lot, but we talked about gasification and pyrolysis. Gasification is not combustion. Neither one of these are combustion because they're not really utilizing oxygen to make the processes work. Gasification may have little oxygen in it. Pyrolysis has no oxygen. Both of them are taking temperature and or pressure to break down the materials into molecular elements so that you can remove things like and scrub out hydrogen, typically, carbon dioxide, and do something with it, or create new compounds out of it, such as oils. In plastics to oils. I will put big question marks as to the cost because we really don't know what the costs are. There's a lot of companies that will tell you what the costs are, and until you see them actually perform commercially, where the commercial terms are truly known, we would say that there's not enough data out there to support many claims of commercial operation. But these things can have dramatic effects on what you can do, especially for targeted pieces of the waste streams. Waste plastics is a great example. Pyrolysis would be a great application for waste plastics, and there are companies out there that are using pyrolysis on plastics to create oil type products. People will perceive these technologies as combustion. They will put them into the same category as that. They oftentimes have reduced air emissions because there's not oxygen going into the facilities. So there is, they're not consuming oxygen, and therefore they're not releasing it. I will throw out the one I mentioned before. There is a biofuels facility that's creating methanol with conversion eventually to ethanol soon. It is utilizing about 300 tons a day of refuse-derived fuel, so they are doing front-end processing of waste up in Edmonton. It's part of this facility. This is I'd say this is a commercial facility, but the commercial terms aren't really known. This was a investment. There's a lot of grants put into this thing. It's not really clear as to where the numbers come out, but it is something that's working, and it's a great technology as far as we can see. We like to throw this chart in there just to give you a sense for risk. Any type of system that you look at, in fact, we would want to make sure you're looking at the risk to development. And we put up the top, processing recyclables, composting, and mass burn combustion, we would say, is proven commercial technology, and it's low risk from the standpoint of technology risk. So we're not talking about systems and whether or not systems will work as a system, but for the technology itself, as to what it's supposed to do, it works. When you get to RDF, anaerobic digestion, you're starting to get into some areas where the examples are not as well understood from a commercial standpoint, but there is some examples of it, and I think that it's a moderate risk. Some can be low risk. It's really when you get to the conversion technologies, in our opinion, where you start to get a fairly high risk profile in terms of will this work. Now you can look at it from a demonstration standpoint. You can look at it from a field, laboratory standpoint. And we always encourage those type of investigations. But from providing this as your technology to solve your problem, just throwing it out there that we would say that the technology is not known on a commercial scale, that we would recommend it to solve your, disposal problems going forward. It's the summary here of sort of the different options we threw at you. From no change to advanced recovery, we threw relative dollar signs in there as to what the impacts would be on to the consumer. Everything from source reduction being small dollar sign, but also not going to have a real impact on your diversion, recycling and collection, starting to build up the costs, and then some of the diversion and energy recovery being a lot more costly, but also having a much bigger impact on your ability to reduce what you throw away and manage what you throw away. All right, so we're almost right at that time, and I have an exercise that I would like you to do. So we've thrown a lot of information at you, and one of the things that we want to start to understand from your standpoint is, based on what you've seen and what you've heard, I know you haven't been around a whole lot of this, but we've hopefully given you some food for thought. What do you see as elements in a plan? What's your vision so far of the things that you would like to see in a plan going forward? Because by next time we meet in a workshop, we want to start analyzing systems for you. And hopefully by the end of today, we're going to take some of this and some discussion and come up with some different scenarios that may be applicable, and we want to come back to you with detailed analysis on. So I'm going to hand this up here. No cheating. I'm looking at your neighbor. All right. So you can think of this almost as voting. And nothing you do here is going to necessarily get you to, we're not writing anything in stone. It's more to start to get a sense of this. So I'm asking you to take 10 votes, 10 checks. So in the little boxes to the right of the different options, we're asking you to, no cheating over there. I see you guys talking. Asking you to vote. So if you had to say, well, what are the 10 items that that might be up to 10? You don't have to put 10 down, but up to 10. And you can you can put more than one vote in a box, but no more than 3. So that's the ground rules are saying. We'd like you to sort of take 10 ideas of here that you think might be in a system. It doesn't have to be in one. We can maybe put them in a couple. And if you think that one has more weight than others, you could put 2 checks in it, or you could put 3. But you only get 10 checks total, up to 10. You don't have to even use 10 if you don't want to use them all up. And then in the end, I think after we take a break, we're going to compile the results, and we're going to sort of show where you guys are at as a group in terms of some of the things that you think are more applicable at this point to what you would recommend or start to see as recommendations to Rutherford County. So if you can take about 10 minutes, and then we'll take a break. So it's 7:35, so maybe around 7:50 or so we'll reconvene after you're done. And if you could, I'll take your answers when you're done.
May I borrow your pen?
Oh, absolutely. Does anybody else need a pen? I've got a number of pens.
get there about 5:30.
Five.
Yeah, we need to talk about schools.
Do it so they aren't watching.
Yeah. He used to come.
That's a.
Etc. Apparently.
Flamed out.
Getting lost for zero, and
Yeah.
then the implications if you go to $55 per ton
Flamed out. Rob got married.
has some cost now.
He flamed out too. Rob.
No, he's still doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll do that. I want to sort of get a sense of where the whole system is from
I know they're looking at this big number right here.
activity.
Along
Or is it
with the
just
rest
individual
of the
folks?
county,
Or is it something that really reaches broader into the school system?
All right, we ready to start back?
That's a different group.
All right. Floor's yours again.
All right. Well, I want to say welcome to Mayor Burgess. Thank you for being able to make it. I know you had another commitment. I want to thank everyone. We had full participation in our, everyone turned in results, so we are going to tally them up and have a discussion on them. It was nothing as clear as I thought it was going to be. More things that were clear, so it'll be interesting discussions when we start to talk about how we're going to, what type of scenarios make sense for this county. But I'd like to take a few minutes to talk about two other topics before we get back into defining scenarios for the county. The first one is organization, and the second will be paying for your system. And I want to give you a census for both of those because if you do something, you're going to have somebody take responsibility for doing it, managing it, paying, financing it, contracting for it, etc. And eventually, if it costs money, which I'm telling you every single one of these things will cost money, you have to have a way to pay for that. And we'll throw out some ideas on how people pay for their systems across this country. But let's start with our organization. And I'll go back to a theme I started with was, one of your options is everyone goes it on their own. And I'm not saying that that's not an option for this county. It could be, where the city would be responsible for its waste disposal, county for what it collects would be responsible for its waste disposal, and the private haulers that are operating in the county are responsible for their disposal. Is it going to be the most efficient? Probably not. Is it going to provide other opportunities for diversion or other things you want to do? Probably not. But it is an option. So I'm going to call it the go it alone solution. A second option is that we see is the county to take the responsibility of this. The county, of the political bodies in the county is probably the one that makes the most sense as a existing political entity that could do it on behalf of the municipalities and the unincorporated areas in the county. Of Murfreesboro, Rutherford County Authority, and not excluding the other communities, but I'm saying that, let's say that there was one that was called the Murfreesboro, Rutherford County Authority, would be an independent body created by the counties and the county and the cities to be independent of both the city and the county. And we'll talk about that. And lastly, we'll talk about a regional authority, which would be something that would involve parties outside of this county, maybe other counties, maybe other cities, typically governmental entities, not necessarily private entities. So again, what is go it alone? As I mentioned, it's everyone sort of on their own, and you're typically direct hauling unless someone builds their own facility. They could build their own facility and send it to it, but you're on your own from how you get rid of your waste. Unless you're building facilities, there's not a lot of investment. There's no agreements needed with other communities. I would say that there is obviously less efficiency. There's not economies of scale, and you're not going to have the ability to do other things such as advance a lot of initiatives that may benefit for the whole county. County management. Again, the county, probably the solid waste department, would take responsibility for financing, constructing, operating, managing, contracting the facility. It doesn't mean that it has to run it itself. It could privately operate, but it would be the owner of the asset. The cities would most likely, or the communities would have interlocal agreements, so some type of long-standing agreement with the county to provide services to them. Again, it could provide for public-private partnerships, so the county doesn't have to do it all. The county could involve other partners, the private partners in it, but the county would still be managing it as a local entity. Benefits of this type of systems are local control. You do have some economy of scale. You do have 80,000 tons are currently managed by the city and the county, and you have upwards of maybe 300,000 tons if the county manages all the waste within the county. With that, you get some benefit of pricing. You will need staff. Mac is a capable guy, but I don't think he wants to take this on by himself. So we think you're probably going to need at least a couple people, depending on what you do, on top of what you already have to implement a new system. And this would be different. This would be a change, and that change is always difficult. And given the size of your volume of waste, it may limit your technology options. We want to show an example of where this is being done as a county. This is a client of ours, Lee County, Florida. They are bigger than Rutherford by about twice, I believe. I think you're around 350,000 people. So this is about twice the size of the county. There are a number of municipalities, but there is also a lot of unincorporated areas in the county. So they do have agreements with the municipalities or cities for disposal, but they are the contract entity. They have the infrastructure. They manage the system. That's a picture of their waste energy system there. They also have a landfill. They actually have a landfill in an adjacent county. So they own a landfill in an adjacent county. It's like people owning reservoirs in other states, for their own water supply. They manage the collection of the unincorporated areas. They don't manage the city collections, but in the unincorporated areas, they provide for collection services. Not something that currently Rutherford County is doing. HCW is household chemical waste. Some people refer to it as household hazardous waste. They have a facility for that. They have their own MRF. They've got an economy of scale where it makes sense for them to have their own. They manage C&D processing. They do have a recycling center for construction demolition debris. They have a composting facility for yard waste and sludge, and they have tire recycling. It is a comprehensive system. But they've got a lot of waste. You can see they've got 500 tons a day of municipal solid waste, et cetera, all the way down. They also have a budget of almost $100 million a year. They have 5 elected county commissioners that are responsible for all of the county, and they spend part of their time, dealing with stuff like this. 102 employees and 17 temporary laborers. Again, $80 million budget, of which about $10 million of that is debt service. So they do issue bonds for their facilities, especially the waste energy facility, and their tipping fee is currently about $40 a ton. So it's not bad, but they've got economy of scale to make that happen. And they are losing their power purchase agreement at the end of this year, and that's going to have an impact on them. So their pricing for electricity is going to change, and that's going to change their rate structure. But not only do they do tipping fees, but they also put assessments out on people's properties, both their commercial and residential, and they do it as about $200 per year for the average household assessment. So in addition to paying tipping fees, they provide service as part of this assessment. That provides collection services as well. So keep in mind, they're not paying for just disposal. They're also providing the collection service. They have also franchised out the collection. So the county has taken responsibility out there, and they are, the haulers take on the opportunity, and they pay the county almost $2 million a year for the right to collect garbage within the county, and they sell recyclables. So that's how they raise their revenue. So what would an authority look like for the county and the city? Well, one, it would be independent. There is a law in Tennessee. It's called the Tennessee Solid Waste Authority Act of 1991 that sets forth that counties and communities can join together and make an independent authority. So the legislation is already there. There's plenty of examples within the state of people who have done this. It could include all the municipalities as sitting members. It could not. It depends on what you want to do. So the benefits of that typically are, one, it removes the financial piece of this from the county government. It operates independent. That means that no taxes are paid for this. It's only whatever rates you set, but it won't be the general fund, unless the general fund you want to pay for it. That debt service is not associated with the county, so it doesn't impact your debt ratings as well as your borrowing limits. There's economy of scale as well as the county. And I would say one thing too about the benefits is it takes the politics somewhat out of garbage. Politics is never out of garbage completely, but elected officials are a little bit in a more difficult position to make tough calls when it comes to solid waste than authority members, whose their sole job is to manage the authority assets. The elected officials are responsible for a lot more than that, and so there's typically more difficult political pressures that come onto counties. So there's a benefit in removing that piece of it from the county.
How are the board members or authority members chosen under this law?
Oftentimes, it's done through. Let's say it's all 4 communities in the county. Maybe the county gets 4 members, and each of the municipalities gets a member. Or maybe Rutherford gets 3, and the county gets 5, and each one gets 1. So it depends on how you set it up.
And they're appointed by the county commission, city council?
Usually, it's by the elected bodies. So usually, the county would appoint its members, and each of the communities would appoint their members. And oftentimes, they're rotating terms. That's how it typically goes. And often I don't know if the act allows for payments to the board members. Most times, board members aren't paid. It's another thankless job. Challenges of something like this are that you do need an administration. You do need staff. It's probably going to be more than if it's at the county, because you do already have some staff in the county to be able to help do this. So you would need, separate leadership, separate administrative staff, et cetera. We'll just throw it out there as 3 to 4, depending on what you do. You would need an office. Now, the county could lease office space, or the authority or the city could lease office space. It doesn't have to be a permanent space, but you do need a way for the business to be conducted. And the public will see this as another fee, similar to a wastewater treatment facility. It's a fee. It'll come through at some point that those costs need to be there. Now, I'm throwing a New Jersey example because I was the executive director of this authority, so I can speak to this one pretty well. This was an authority a little bit smaller than Rutherford County. It was the Warren County, New Jersey authority up in northwest New Jersey. We don't have unincorporated areas. We only have municipalities. We had 22 municipalities in the county. And we had a fairly extensive system. We had a landfill. We had a waste energy facility. But we partnered with 2 other counties for the waste energy facility. So we were small enough that we needed 2 much larger counties to partner with us under long-term agreements to make that facility happen. And even as such, we were only 500 tons a day. And that was a very small facility, one of the smallest ones that's out there still. We ran our own landfill, had our own recycling drop-off center, very similar to the recycling center you have now. And we did about, 200 to 300,000 tons a year of waste, so about a third of what the county, about what this county is doing total, but not a third of what's currently coming into the landfill. And we had 11 staff when I was there, including 5 board members. They were appointed by the county. This was a county authority, so this doesn't have the municipalities weren't members of this county. This is just a county authority. But if it was a interlocal or city county, it could have a different makeup. Budget for that authority was about $7 million operating and about $1 million a year capital. When we had tipping fees at our facilities from 40 for low on the low contract side to $100. All of our money was primarily raised through tipping fees. We didn't have any other assessments or any other ways. We did have some grants and we sold recyclables, but most of our money was raised on tipping fees. So what would a regional authority look like? Well, it would involve people outside the county. It can involve other cities, metro areas, or other counties. That is also allowed to be developed under the Solid Waste Authority Act of 1991. Again, the benefits are similar to the other authority. It's outside of one county's, jurisdiction. It's independent of all the elected bodies' revenues and debts, and you get a much bigger economy of scale potentially. You're going to need, depending on the size and what the county authority does, it could be. Our authority had 11 people. We also ran a landfill. It depends on what you do, what kind of staff you'll need. And there's the other challenges within authorities. One thing I'd say is that, and we're throwing it a little in here before we show the example of an authority, is that, Middle Tennessee is in a tough position right now, and I think Middle Point's sort of central to that issue. You have some counties on the northern side that are looking at waste to energy options. You have others like Nashville that are looking to go to zero waste to landfill, in part because of the closure of Rutherford. And you're going to end up in a capacity crunch. As I mentioned, the Middle Point landfill is 1.1 million tons a year. You got one of the landfills at half a million tons, and then you've got a lot of landfills that come up to 1 million tons. And there's a lot of waste disposal need in this area. So what's going to drive this? Well, it's going to be location. You're probably in a prime location to be able to be in the center of a potential capacity issue. You do have a waste energy facility to the north in Alabama, and if you are sort of central in between there to where the other populations are going to be needing disposal capacity. So, if there was a time to be thinking of a regional approach, now might be a good time. And so there is I think there's things happening in Middle Tennessee that you're not alone in your issue, and you may be working with other communities may be a benefit to you in terms of a long-term solution. In terms of an example of an authority that manages things beyond a county, we picked the Three Rivers Solid Waste Authority in South Carolina. It's about the same population that it serves, but it's through 9 counties. And they have, primarily they provide landfill disposal service. There are transfer stations that get the waste to the landfill, but each of the counties has taken upon themselves to provide a transfer station. So the landfill provides the planning of the facility and the ultimate disposal of that. They provide some waste tire and some white goods recycling, but pretty much it's the disposal facility authority for that region. It's around 255,000 tons a year. Again, very similar to what Rutherford County generates. That authority, because it has 9 county members, has 9 board members, and it has a staff of 25 that mostly run the landfill. $7.5 million operating budget. They get their revenue exclusively from tipping fees, and they have taken the gas from the landfill, turned it into electricity, and they get some revenue from that. But predominantly, it's the tipping fees that are running that authority. All right. Actually, I'm going to do paying for the system before we go into we start talking about some scenarios. So once you have a system, you need to be able to pay for it. And so we have some objectives here that we wanted to throw out there as sort of some guiding principles to any revenue system. One is that your revenue should cover your costs. So you don't want to create an unfunded issue here. So you need to make sure, and I throw it out there, not that that's a duh moment, but there are entities that have gone out and have not set rates to cover their costs. And then they end up with this, oh my gosh, scenario when they're looking at major debt that they can't pay, and they run into a big trouble. This Southeastern Public Service Authority in Virginia is a good one if you want to Google that one. They ended up going from like a $40 rate to a $120 rate almost overnight per ton because nobody wanted to raise rates and to cover their costs. A second principle besides covering your costs is that you need to have reliable sources of revenue. We think that in general it's nice to diversify off of just having it based on the amount of waste you get in. Because if you want to promote waste reduction and you want to promote recycling, then you're going to have a conflict in having your system be funded by those tipping fees they're paying for that disposal piece. So you don't want to have that conflict inherent into your system. That's why many people say that the waste energy facilities are competing with recycling because they need the tons. Well, they need the tons because they need the money. They might be able to operate on less tons, but they need the tons because they need the money. A third principle is you want to equitably, put the revenues across your residents and businesses. You don't want to overload one versus the other. Many times people will burden the businesses a little bit more than residents because the residents vote, businesses don't. But we think as equitably as you want to try to be as equitable as possible. And lastly, you need to be able to, people need to be able to pay these fees. So the fees do need to be affordable. You can think of the system that you really think should be here, but when you look at what's going to cost, whether or not people can afford that, that needs to be there. So those are the guiding principles of any revenue system. In terms of options, we'll list out a bunch and we'll go through them pretty quickly. Obviously, general fund, especially if the local governments and the county want to do this, they can just put it on the tax base. Tipping fees, as I mentioned, they are the price you pay per ton when you go into the facility. The system benefit charges or assessments are somewhat like a tax, but they're more designed to pay for the system that is being put into the system. So if you're providing collection services, you put this charge onto, that may not be directly related to exactly the amount that's being done, but let's say each household puts out a ton of waste. You figure out what that ton of waste costs to collect, to run some other services, and you sort of have that be for a single family, and then maybe a multifamily has a different assessment, and businesses have different assessments. So the system benefit charges and assessments are ways, or it's a little bit more thoughtful than just a tax. Commodities and energy are something very simple. If you collect something that has a value, then you can sell it, including energy. You can do that. If you have private industries or private facilities, they can provide host benefits. That's how you're currently paying for your system, in large part, by having some host fees. Licensing fees and franchise fees and impact fees, well, at least the licensing fees and franchise fees are things you would charge haulers operating in the county. If you want to license your haulers to make sure that the haulers are providing quality vehicles, that they're abiding by rules, whatever rules may be, you could do that. Usually that's not a big revenue generator. Franchise fees are more saying that you have an exclusive franchise area in the county, you have the right to collect all waste in there, and for that right, you pay the county an amount of money. Or in the city, if the city broke up the collection, which I'm not suggesting happens. And impact fees are lastly that you could put it into your budgets or a way to say that new residents or businesses coming into the county are going to have a proportional burden on the solid waste infrastructure. And as such, it's like a connection fee to a sewer system. There's a fee that when you come into the county, you pay that fee to the solid waste department to help pay for the management of a system that everyone else has already paid into. Those are options. And these are just some of the descriptions of them that I won't necessarily go into detail on. But basically, these are your toolbox that can be used to pay for your system once you help define a system. All right. So defining scenarios, part 2. What I thought we would do is this exercise that we did before was intended to try and gauge from you all if there's any clear things you're in favor of and some things that you may not be in favor of as a group. And I was surprised to see that everything had votes. No option was sort of off the table from this group, and so we actually compiled the results. And Vanna White will please, I'm sorry, Jeff, we'll do this. I thought it was going to into three different categories. If you recall, we threw a bunch of options out there. And again, I don't want to say this is the world of options for you, but the things that had the lowest seam of votes, and again, the rules were that you had up to 3 votes and you had 10 votes total. The things that had the least amount of interest in the county was a new landfill in the county. Anaerobic digestion was only 2 votes for that. Very little interest in the county contracting for collection in the unincorporated areas, and some votes for additional recycling centers needed in the county. So I'd say this is the lowest tier. So we put it into 3 tiers. The middle tier that had a lot of interest, actually all of these were 9s, were residential curbside recycling in the county. So right now you have some private services being provided, but there's not an overall a plan to provide that service countywide. Composting of organics, a transfer station, mixed waste processing. Expanding Middle Point actually got 9 votes, which I was a bit surprised of. Out of county landfill was 9 votes as well. And advanced technology. So no matter what I tell you about saying that advanced technology is not ready, there's still an interest in it. And I think that's important. That's good to know. And I think when we talk about flexibility and systems being able to take advantage of technology of tomorrow, that's an important component. And the things that had the most interest was making sure you have education and outreach, having a materials recovery facility in the county, or access to one probably at least, waste to energy, source reduction, and residential collection in the city. So I don't know if Joey, is there a move right now yet to look at curbside collection of recyclables in the city? Okay. So it's anyway, so these are the different groupings, and I think what I was looking to start to have is, if we wanted to create a couple scenarios, I don't know if there's a way we could put this somewhere on another sheet. I think the idea that we were hoping for was to kind of get a sense for what's in and what's out. And I don't know if this truly plays in that the county, shouldn't be looking into the contracting business. You don't want to look at anaerobic digestion. You don't want to be looking at a new landfill in Rutherford County, and you don't need additional recycling centers. So I'll open the door to say, is any of those, ring true to this group? We want to start eliminating some things from consideration of the future. And the reason I'm being is we've got this funnel here of ideas, and I think we need to start narrowing the funnel down to be able to get to some scenarios that we can, evaluate and have some detail, and to come back to you with what these things might look like as scenarios. And is there anything that anyone feels that we can begin to eliminate from consideration?
I personally think the contract collection for the county, I know it was mentioned either Rutherford County do it or contract out, but just based on what I deal with, I don't see the cost effectiveness of doing that, because we at the highway department only maintain roughly 970 road miles in the county. That does not count for Eagleville, Laverne, Smyrna, and the city of Murfreesboro roads, and it does not take into account the state highways that people live on, that we would have to have folks going out to collecting trash, and that's a lot of households. To me, a recycle center is very, the way it's set up in the county is very efficient for, like in the Las Casas area and things like that, because there's a lot of distance between homes.
Right.
in that end of our county, whereas in the city of Murfreesboro, you can probably load 3 trucks in one subdivision in the city. So I don't personally see how it is cost effective for us to do the county collections, especially if the county is going to be in charge of collecting it, just based on if you do a per house on each road mile and things like that. I just don't see that being feasible.
And I see that from a little bit different perspective. In that some of those more rural areas of the county, there are private haulers that are doing business there. So it's showing that there is a market there for that. And it just begs the question, if you had 100% participation across the board, how much more cost effective it could be for all residents.
Well, that's the argument. And maybe I'll throw all in one on the spot and say, if you had sort of an area within the county, how much more efficient would you be or able to be from a cost standpoint?
It would be, but we don't service Eagleville, for instance, just because there's way too much. You got a truck that's getting 3.5 miles a gallon, and you got to go, 5 minutes between. It doesn't make sense. You'd have to charge those people $30, $40 a month.
Right.
So economically, as she said, it just doesn't make sense.
Right. So the idea of franchising, we've had this discussion with other counties, where does it become efficient when you pull things together? And I would say you'll never get the efficiencies you will in like a city, Murfreesboro, where you have stops. You're not going 5 minutes in between stops and running this truck on $80 an hour or whatever it is to run the truck. So it's the reason we brought up county collection is that right now you don't control the waste.
Well, and it's a mindset, because I live in the county. It used to be rural, but we're growing. 90% of the homes in the subdivision I live in have I think there's about 3 different cans I see set out. They'll come in and pick that up. I pass all them cans to go to the Anvil Recycle Center and put my garbage out. It's 15 minutes round trip, and it's just something that I've always, grown up, that you took care of your trash, and a long time ago you could burn it in a can. So it's just a mindset, and if you did something like that, you would have to educate, because you would have some old thinkers like, I'm not going to pay for somebody to take my garbage off. I can take my own garbage off. So.
And I wonder whether it might be possible to find a compromise in there where you set up something like Metro's Urban Services District outside the cities, but still in the more densely populated areas of the county, where you wouldn't be reaching the rural areas, the really rural areas where people are too spread out to make it cost effective, but you could still establish areas of the county where it would be cost effective to do that.
So an urban service district, sort of something, say, surrounding a more highly densely populated area.
Because that's a lot the way we're growing. We're getting denser population, we're growing more densely these days as much outside the cities as inside.
Any other thoughts? Does the idea of an urban service district change anyone's votes, that they would have voted for this if it was only limited to more densely populated areas?
I probably would have put a check mark by it if I thought about it that way.
Okay. I guess the question comes like, should this be part of something that's looked at for the county, or just held? I mean, again, by not putting it as part of a strategic plan doesn't mean it doesn't become part of it. It just means it's not going to be something that you really spend time on at this point going forward. And should looking at collection, it could be mentioned or something, but not necessarily really targeted from the standpoint of a system. Should that be taken off the table? It's hard to eliminate, guys, I know. right, well, let's table that one. I think the idea, again, what we're trying to do is see if we can start whittling down some ideas. So very little votes. What's that?
You know, it looks to be like what our ultimate goal here is to find out what to do with the trash.
Yep.
The end product of it. And who picks it up and carries it where doesn't really make that much difference, as I see it.
It does.
And that's when we talk about the transfer stations and stuff like that. What does that really do with the end of it? I mean, you're just moving it somewhere else.
Well, the reason that we brought up collection is that 2/3 of your waste or more are not managed by the county or the city. So even if the city and the county get involved to do something, you're going to be limited as to the tons that are available to your system unless you partner with someone else.
Does that suggest then that the issue of how it should be collected is something that you back into once you decide, you start with what do we have to manage, what are the best ways to manage it, and then if one of the best ways to manage it is to get more control get control of more of the waste stream, then that would suggest that you should look at collecting it yourself or contracting to have it collected in some ways. It seems like you would want to back into that decision rather than start with it.
Well, I think that it's probably a little bit of both. I think you have to have some reality. Again, you look at waste
some
energy.
idea of the cost.
Let's say you really think waste energy is a way to go, but you need 2,000 tons a day to make it work. I'm not saying that's the right number. I'm just saying that may be the number. Where you're so far away from that at 80,000 tons that, you really need a major partner, or you need to be thinking of the county as a whole to even start, in my opinion, to really think about that. So, we do need to sort of look at both ends a little bit because I don't think you can look at technology without thinking about how you're going to get the waste to that technology. Because the system's got to work as a whole.
Well, that's really my point. That's really my point.
Yeah. So I think you can look at it both ways, and I think that part of the reason I'm bringing this up is that if you're going to look at some of the technologies, you're going to need to either have a partner or you're going to need to get a little bit of economy of scale. And that's something we talked about right off the bat with the county when we met with them. Is that really some of the technology you're talking about, you're not going to be able to do it on your own at this point. Not reasonably. We wouldn't recommend it. I think you're going to be surprised when the numbers come back to you as to what they would cost, especially at 80,000 tons a year. No one's doing it. So I think that. So maybe let's talk about. Let's just bring it up the idea of other partners. Let me just ask the question about other partners. If having a partner allows these technology options that may be beneficial, is that something that this board would recommend to this group would recommend to the county and the city? Do you think that it's worth doing that, or should we? Maybe at this point we should start talking about the end result and see if we can back in. All right. So from the standpoint of a final disposal, things that were low on the realm, the only one that's really two that were out there was a new landfill in Rutherford County, and anaerobic digestion was not put out there. So let's talk about new landfill in Rutherford County. Is that off the table?
They don't want the one we got. I don't imagine they'll want a new one.
Had 2 votes. Somebody voted for it. Somebody might have voted twice for it, so I don't know. But they had 2 votes, so somebody thought it was worth considering.
I mean, it's feasible, but not in this county because we have complaints now with the one we've got, and nobody wants it in their back door. So,
Okay.
I just don't see that one for anywhere else in the county.
Yeah.
I think it's off the table. As a commissioner and the county mayor can certainly chime in. That is a hard political pill to swallow.
And I think from the municipality standpoint, there's not an area in the municipality where you could put a landfill, so really it reverts back to the county. And I know from our leachate and things that we get discussion about that, I would say it's off the table too.
Geologically, I'm not sure what the pre-qualifications would be geologically to have a big enough site to qualify. We're having a hard enough time to find land to perk for a subdivision. You
don't need land to perk, but I think that's a little bit of another discussion as to whether or not there's available land. That's a siting study. I think the bigger question is, from the standpoint of something, and again, you're not making the decision here, but you're making the recommendation and trying to guide guidance. If we're trying to whittle some stuff down. So does anybody want to say, sort of put a different view out there regarding landfill in the county?
Well, what is the possibilities? One of the other items was expansion of the middle point, so explore that.
All right, well, let's talk about that then. Let's talk about exploring middle point. So middle point, got 9 votes. So over either half of you all voted for it, or actually, somebody voted twice. No, whatever. But
3 people.
Yeah,
voted 3 times.
So so let's talk about that. Is that something that, again, one thing I'll caution is that it's Republic's landfill, and the county does have a landfill adjacent to it, and so this would be something that, is that part of something that should be engaged in a discussion, if it could be done?
Sounds like that's a short-term solution. I say short-term in the grand scheme of things, I guess.
Well, I think the idea that we're trying to come up to, though, is somewhat of a, it could be part of a medium to long-range solution. I mean, if it could be expanded, it would be able to be, something immediately implemented, from the standpoint of, hopefully it could be expanded, the capacity expanded within the time frame you have left.
It's hard for me to think about expanding Middle Point or building a new landfill without thinking about you had a chart up there for how you allocate cost, or what your cost consideration should be, and one of them was treating everyone equitably. It's hard for me to see expanding Middle Point as treating everyone equitably, and even citing a new landfill creates the same problem. The people who are near it are, what do we do to compensate the people who are going to
That's a different discussion.
Right.
That's part of the discussion.
Yeah.
But I would say that there are mechanisms, one, to address problems. There's always mechanisms to address problems. And 2, host benefits are often intended to compensate for impacts. Mm-hmm. The county has enjoyed a host benefit. The city has enjoyed a host benefit from the landfill.
But the people who live near it haven't enjoyed a host benefit.
You could have targeted, just thrown out there, you could have targeted benefits. I don't know what they might be. I'm not going to even suggest it publicly. But all you can eat. I think that the consideration is, I think that's like if the idea is that yes, but it must be, equitable, it must be fair, it must, pass some test of acceptance. I don't know if there's anything that would say that landfill expansion would be acceptable to people. That's beyond my ability to say that. But I do think that there are ways to try to address issues, whether they be odors or technical or dust or trucks or whatever, or, the fact that there's a landfill in the backyard, just the fact that it's there.
But isn't landfilling a part of the overall process? And so it seems as though, granted, the land itself is the commodity, and how much do you have, and how can you take it? But it seems as though that has to be a part of the puzzle.
I'd say it's part of any system. You need to make sure you have that as piece of it. It depends on how much you need to rely on that technology. If it's going to be the keystone. So one thing that we will eventually try to talk about is when we start to put these things together, there's usually a philosophy or some type of binding item that defines those scenarios. And one way to look at it as a keystone, what is the stone that's holding up, this archway? Well, it's the one stone at the top. It's the keystone, and that stone defines sort of what that scenario may be. So we may want to eventually have a keystone. Now, that keystone may be the landfill. Landfill may be the central piece of your disposal strategy, but you may have other things that are part of it. Or the landfill is not the keystone, but it's part of it. It may not be this landfill, maybe other landfills. And if it's only like ash from a waste energy facility, that's 1/10 the volume of the waste. So it's a much different scenario when you're talking about that.
This may be what she just asked. I'm not really certain, but each one of these other technologies still in the end requires something to be put in a landfill. So we're going to need a landfill anyway about it.
You may not need it here. I will argue, and there's probably some that will argue against me, that there's a landfill as part of every solution, period.
How does Metro think they're going to reduce their waste stream to zero?
I think it's a philosophy, and I think that it's an aspiration. I think that the realistic, there's debates as to what zero waste means. Some is zero waste to landfill. Well, there is no scenario that I know of that's zero waste to landfill unless you can do something with the ash. Now, there are some technologies out there that are trying to recover some of the ash, but I'll tell you right now that to think that you're going to get away from the landfill completely, in my opinion, is not reasonable. You can minimize it, and you can try to take things to take that as part of just a supporting role. But there's stuff in our waste stream that's just not going to be able to be managed, or there's going to be byproducts from any technology you have at this point.
Is there a compromise? I live on the north side of town, and I think it's safe to say if you ask 100 people who live on the north side of Murfreesboro or who live close to the landfill, I would think it would be safe to say that a high majority would tell you that they would not want to see the landfill expanded. On a morning with a low ceiling, I live 3 miles from the landfill, and I can smell it at my house. And telling someone that you're going to expand that, I think would be hard to get someone to support that. And that's I live a mile from our sewage treatment facility plant, and I can't smell that from my house. So, if we, in an effort of compromise, would there be a way? And I'm sure we can't negotiate this with Republic now, but the issue would not be in getting or supporting Middle Point to expand, because then all of a sudden you have a gazillion other counties who are going to be bringing their trash down to Rutherford County. So if you were able to expand Middle Point and that be expanded for the use of Rutherford County, then that could be an option, but I don't know how you would do that.
Maybe. I would say, not going to speak for Republic, but I'm going to guess no. It would be the just Rutherford County. That being said, you don't know until you ask. I mean, Republic does pick up a lot of waste within Rutherford County. This is the most convenient spot for them to take their waste. So for a period of time, this may be part of a solution. This may be part of a solution that gets you by for a certain amount of time. It may be something that's acceptable to Republic. I guess the question is, do you want to have that as part of something you explore? We in a working group, we're trying to figure out where you want to go with your ideas. I think that if that's, I think there's potential compromise. It's I don't know if it will get you exactly where you want to go, but I think the issue is, in order to do that, you have to open up dialogue specifically.
Well, I feel safe saying if there's not some sort of compromise, I don't think the residents would. I think most residents would not want to see that expanded any greater than what it is right now.
Okay.
I tend to agree with what Shandy just said, but if you really look at the practicality of all of this, that is the quickest, short-term, greatest return on the investment of dollars, is expanding that landfill. Otherwise, we're talking about waste to energy, for example, MRF, all of that has to work together, which costs hundreds of millions of dollars, and we don't even have enough volume in our own county to make it feasible. At least that's what I've been hearing you say. So from a practical standpoint, it's something that we really have to look at, even though none of us want to do it, okay? Because I think it's one of the most cost-efficient things that could be discussed.
So what I'm hearing is that it seems like there is some support for this being a potential part of a scenario or a recommendation, but maybe it needs to be modified to more limit it to benefits to Rutherford County, and it may need to be geared towards, looking at it from a fairness standpoint to potentially address local concerns from an equitable standpoint.
The practical argument makes sense to me. At the same time, I'd like to see us aspire to something, I don't see any point in making making any kind of proclamation like Metro did that we're going to have zero landfill waste when everyone understands that is just not at all practical. I don't want us to seem impractical or too unrealistically high-minded about it. But if we don't start with some aspiration to reduce the volume of waste that goes to a landfill, it's hard for me to see how we will give serious consideration to those other options. With the growth rate that we have in this county, excuse me, we can plan for 2030, but then what happens in 2050, 2060? If we haven't set ourselves on a course to reduce the amount that goes to a landfill by 2030, then we're creating a much bigger job for people in the future to find a new way. In the meantime, technology surely will give us better solutions, but then you may have a middle point that you can't control, and that is going to continue to be expanded year after year, decade after decade, because the technologies for expanding landfills are going to improve. So I'm not arguing against the landfill at all. It's practical, and it has to be an element of our scenarios. But I am arguing for an aspirational goal that's something above that looks to try to looks more to the future, tries to reduce the amount that goes into the landfill, but at the same time doing it in some more cost-effective ways that either we generate some energy or we position ourselves better to take advantage of potential markets for waste or energy or whatever.
I agree with Mayor Burgess's assessment. I mean, here's a guy that's got to find the funding for schools and judicial buildings and everything else, and we do have to find as cost-efficient way as possible. Having said that, I agree also that we need to put full court press on the public with respect to the severity of where we are, because I don't think people out there really know that what's about to hit them in 8 years. I personally think we ought to have recycling options in every one of our communities. As many subdivisions in the county as possible. I know it's not as feasible as this. In Smyrna it'd be relatively easy. I guess y'all do it here, don't you, Shane? Yeah. But I think we need to indoctrinate the public on what's about to hit them. At the same time, I would certainly support expanding Middle Point if Republic's interested.
Okay.
So a couple of points about that, picking up is, the two things that are on top of it, the one is looking at expanding Middle Point. The second, the one right below it, is looking for an out-of-county option. Well, those two things are directly comparable, right? That's the kind of thing you would look at. It's not another landfill in Rutherford County, but you would look at those, and if one's $25 a ton, $50 a ton, and one's $125, again, you'll get some direct comparisons, and those are right there. And a lot of the things that I see on the list is that I think it sounds like folks have bought into the fact that we're talking about we have to move a mountain. We're talking about 400,000 tons a year, and you look at those things, we're talking about moving things, not small items, but the things that got the most votes were landfills and things that are going to actually make a dent in the actual volume, not just picking at the edges, if you will. So I just kind of bring that up. To me, that seems like a theme. And obviously, you can't go out of county, you can't do this unless you have a transfer station. So the fact that a transfer station makes a list with that seems very appropriate.
Right.
So those are the comparison points. I would say the real, and I would ask regarding the expansion of the current Middle Point possibility. Mayor McFarland's talking about. We're talking about reducing the volume. One way to reduce the volume is if we had a different deal where we weren't taking in the out-of-county trash, because that's now 65% of the million tons a year, right? 650,000 tons is from out-of-county. So the first thing is, I think, is that what might that look like, and does the current host agreement have to expire to get into a new type of an agreement? Because you're talking about a compromise or a negotiation, but I'm just wondering to even enter into a discussion that would extend it under different circumstances.
I'll say that anything's possible in negotiation. I think any contract can be amended. What I wrote there about expanding Middle Point is, can it be negotiated for less waste? Maybe to adjust just the 300,000 to 400,000 tons of waste, if that capacity even would be able to be in that landfill for a certain amount of time, and then addressing some local concerns. So I think the answer is it depends. Again, we have Public's here, but we're not going to put them on the spot. Nobody should to try to say what might be happening. I think the issue is, should that be part of a scenario, one or more scenarios that is looked at, and some of these things can have short, medium, and long-term, goals. Some of these plans can have what do we want to look at in the short term? What's a medium-term aspiration? What's a long-term aspiration? Maybe things like conversion technologies or waste to energy, or maybe conversion technologies. Put that one alone. Is a long-term aspiration. And you want to make sure that your plan doesn't necessarily preclude that from happening in the future. Well, that's something you need to consider if you're going to make a capital investment in something that's going to be around for 40 to 50 years. That may preclude that within this planning horizon. If you do something that has more flexibility, then it may not. But something like expanding Middle Point could be part of multiple scenarios. Until we know more what that means, I think the question is, should we be going out and trying to figure out what that means, or do you want to recommend to the county they go back out and try to figure out what that means if it makes sense, as long as it meets certain parameters. Reducing it maybe to just what Rutherford County generates. Again, that's about 1,000 tons a day. Just from Rutherford County, or and addressing local concerns. Let's talk about some other stuff that's on there. You mentioned about out-of-county landfill, so that actually got about the same number of votes as expanding Middle Point. That is, I think that sort of brings the question of it's from our standpoint, it's a reliable technology. It may or may not be available easily around here. Again, it's not a lot of capacity in the area. You may have to go hunt for it a bit. You would need a transfer station to make that happen. But is that something that's part of a scenario, or is that something that's maybe on a short-term scenario while you look at other things? Do you want to look at short, medium, and long-term range goals? A transfer station could be developed in 2-3 years, and could service you for 20 to 40 years plus. Your options then, are the out-of-county landfill can be a 5-year contract, be a 2-year contract. It can get you by for a period of time, so it doesn't have to be your all-in, end-all. If part of your plan is to look at other things down the road. But let's just bring up out-of-county landfill. Like, what role does it play, and should it play a role? Or is it similar to Rutherford County's landfill, that maybe it's, if we can't do it here, maybe we look at that as a short-term option. Is anybody opposed to that idea, looking at landfilling?
Since you if you're going to do that, you have to have transfer station. Question about transfer station. Do you have communities that you could tell us about that have done something like that, put in a transfer station, maybe set themselves up to do something else with the waste in the future, not simply transfer it? You know, maybe they've got, they acquired enough property and so that they would be able to create a MRF or mixed waste processing or something like that on the same site as that becomes more cost effective, so that they're sort of staging things out. Does that make any sense? Has anyone done that?
Nothing comes to mind. I mean, I'm trying to think of the transfer stations that I know of. Oftentimes they are part of a long-term strategy that basically says we're not going to build anything in our home. That's what a transfer station says to me, that you're not going to build technology local, that you are going to rely on, you know, technology somewhere else. It doesn't mean you can't do a MRF. MRF is for recycling. So let's just say MRF is that. I've not seen people do transfer stations and mixed waste processing facilities. Sometimes some people have done transfer stations just as a backup measure. Large systems like that transfer station I showed you for Lee County, it's more of a backup facility. They only use that transfer station when the waste energy facility can't handle the capacity, so they transfer it to the landfill, or they used it when I showed the picture of the recyclables when the recycling facility was out of commission, so they used it to transfer. But it was more of a backup facility. But it was more, I mean, that's a pretty big system, you know, it's handling millions of tons a year.
And remind me, Lee County is twice our size? Is that
about twice your size, yep. And they manage all the county's waste. So they collect it all too, so keep that in mind too. They not only they a bigger county, but they also have a bigger reach in terms of their reach into the management. I think that my feeling is a transfer station, it's not an insignificant investment. It's going to be $5-10 million of an investment, and that's going to need to be paid off. I think that you know, you could do that for a portion of your waste. You could have it be a backup. I mean, I think that if it's a central part of the system, it's not something that then I think people then have looked at. All right, we're going to use this for a while, and then we're going to turn it, mothball it, and do something else locally. I haven't seen that. I'm not saying it can't be done.
So in effect, you're saying that if we were to look at the outside, another county landfill, we would have to do the transfer. So the idea of expanding somewhat what we already have in the county might be a better short-term scenario rather than investing in the transfer station.
Yeah, I mean, if you can expand Middle Point for a while, we don't know how long that'll get you. We don't know how long. I mean, I think the idea of this plan is to be somewhat far-reaching. We haven't defined how long this plan should be. Typical plans are 20 to 40 years in length. I mean, 10 is the minimum, but I would say from a facility financing standpoint and everything else, looking at 20 years is a reasonable reach. That's why we did the 2015 to 2035 projection, just to give you a 20-year picture into maybe what type of tonnage was going to be there. I think, yes, if you could, if expanding Middle Point addressed your short-term need, you wouldn't build a transfer station in the short term. You know, you may say that once Middle Point, you know, if after the expansion of Middle Point you needed to do something, you know, you look at that. But I would say your transfer station is for things outside of the county. That's the reason you would do it. Has there been any thought to building a transfer station in the county to get waste up to the Middle Point? So you could look at some small transfer stations, but in terms of really looking at a large facility to handle the county's waste to get it somewhere final, you know, you'd be looking at one. Actually, it could be one or more facilities. It doesn't have to be one facility. It could be more than one. It depends on what makes the most sense from where the material is being collected and where it's going to go. But I think that the issue of a transfer station comes up in your ideas philosophically if you're going to go somewhere else with it. you could look at it. It's, I think, from the standpoint of in county, if you're moving it in county, it makes it more efficient maybe to do it in county. That's a whole separate question. We're really looking at the big picture, I think, from the long term. What is the plan for handling the county's garbage? So what about technologies like composting? Or let's talk about diversion technologies, because you did mention that we should have aspirations. The things that were aspirational, that got the most votes, were source reduction. So that's sort of I would say, some type of commitment to some education and to maybe some initiatives to encourage diversion of waste. Again, we'll throw out there that that's not going to get you to where you need to go. It could be part of a solution. So should we, we'll start there. Source reduction. Is anyone opposed to source reduction, as part of a strategy? It's going green.
Doesn't that kind of fall under the category of it's the right thing to do?
Of course, but I would say there's a lot of things that are probably the right thing to do, but they all come with a cost. So you have to hire someone. I'd say that if you're going to really push source reduction, you're probably going to have to hire. I know you already have some educators, but you may need to do something more. You may need to go out into businesses. You may need to do some audits in businesses to say, let's help you find ways to do things better.
What I was going to say about that is it would be hard to say, no, we have no interest in source reduction.
Right.
That is just not palatable, I think, to anyone. At the same time, based on the presentation that you made to us, it would be terribly unrealistic to expect it to have much of an impact at all. Didn't your slide suggest that it's maybe 1 to 3% of your... So, we're for source reduction, but as a practical matter, we know it's not going to... that the effect of it is almost insignificant.
Right, and I don't want to... There's going to be a lot of source reduction advocates out there that say it could do a lot more if you did it really, really well. But
I feel like I personally do it rather well with, composting and recycling and blah, 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 blah. But on a large scale,
right.
The
reality is, I think that you're not going to really affect enough change to make things happen. So unless anyone's opposed, we're just going to assume source reduction's in. Let's talk about other things that are diversion technologies. The things that also came out there were residential curbside recycling. So it got some votes in the county and a lot more in the cities. So what does that mean? So do you think curbside recycling should be provided? And if so, there's different ways to do it. You could say you could make it mandatory that everyone has curbside recycling, but that's similar to collection. You're not going to force people to do that. You could say that that the haulers operating in the county can make it a requirement that if they're offering solid waste services, that they also offer recycling services. That's an option. Is there a way that you're going to encourage recycling in the county from a curbside standpoint? Is there anything that comes to mind in terms of a way to make that type of strategy work? If you were told all in one to provide more services curbside, what would make you do it? Is there anything that would
I mean, it's economics. Period. I mean, if it's viable and you can make money, then okay. If you can't, then no. I mean, that's what it comes down to.
But from your standpoint, you charge a fee, and
we charge a fee, and we give them a 96-gallon cart, and they fill it up. We come every 2 weeks and pick it up.
Right. So it depends on whether or not they want to pay that fee.
Correct.
So should the county pay that fee? Or should the county put that fee somewhere else so it doesn't have to make that decision on the homeowner and you get some economy of scale? Is there... Is there ways to make it happen? Is that something that's important to making that service available in the county? Or is the way you're doing it now good enough? Right now it's a market-based system. The customer wants it, and you charge a fee that covers it. It's available.
Well, let me ask the question to you. Are there cities or communities that make it mandatory?
Yep.
And how do they do that?
Well, most of the times they require the service to be provided. So I'll tell you two examples. Lee County, Florida, you have to have service. You are charged that service whether or not you want it or not. You are not allowed not to have service. So when you have service, you have recycling service, whether or not you want it. You're going to be given a cart, and you're going to pay for that cart. You may not pay, it may come through that service and benefit charge or something else, but you're provided that service, and it's not a question. You just have it. Another example is in Madera County, Florida, rural county. The unincorporated areas, the county takes responsibility and does a franchise. Does not require service to be provided. But if service is provided from the haulers, they must offer recycling service. And they actually set pricing on that service up front. And so it is a franchise. It's not an exclusive franchise. It is an exclusive franchise, but it's not a mandatory service. So they have franchised out the county, and they basically said, all right, we're not going to require everyone to have service. We are going to limit the competition. And we're going to divide it. They divide it up into two zones, valley and the mountains. And the mountains have one operator, the valley has another. And for each one, they basically said, they provide a service rate, and if you provide garbage service, you must provide recycling service. You don't have the option, but the homeowner doesn't have the option. They're either going to get the service, and they're going to get a recycling service, or they're not. So it's those type of ways that, but it is the heavy-handed government that's coming along and saying what your service should be.
So in Lee County, do they differentiate? Is there a difference in the fee for this pay-as-you-throw thing? Do they have something like that in place?
They don't. We're actually working with them to potentially establish one.
Mm-hmm. So you're going to pay the same whether you put your stuff in the recycling bin or not?
No, the idea in the pay-as-you-throw.
No, in Lee County now.
In Lee County, right. You pay the same.
Mm-hmm. It seems like there would be some kind of hybrid that you could look at between when you're looking at this source reduction. The municipalities have got the density to be able to, for someone like a private care, you've got the density to be able to get people onto the program. But then in the county, in specific areas now with step systems and those things, you do have the density in certain subdivisions that you've got the same not the same concentration, but a similar concentration to what you have some of the municipalities. Right. It seems like you could go through and look at certain areas within the county that you could do a source reduction and make that to where it would work. But then you bring in other things from the highway department that you now have roads that may not have been constructed to be able to handle the weight of the trucks that are on those roads. So then you bring in some other things that you need to talk about when you're doing that.
So in Madera County, where we're doing some work, we recommend to them to do a high-density mandatory. Right now they have no mandatory service. And we went through a long process with them to say, let's designate part of the zones that had a certain density. And they were typically, either pockets of communities or areas around the cities, to be high-density areas that are subject to a mandatory service. And there was two benefits. One is the price that was bid was like 30% less, and the service was higher. They were given, the haulers proposed, providing 3 carts, brand new carts. The other service did not provide the carts, including green waste services, and the price was 30% lower because they had, a set group that they knew they were going to collect from. They voted for it, and then they had to vote against it because they got challenged and somebody sued them. But that's a whole other story about how they did it. But that is an option. That's sort of that urban grown zone. But I would say that type of recycling, if you're going to call that mandatory, sort of falls aligned with collection. I think it'd be hard to say you have to collect recyclables, but you don't have to collect garbage. That to me seems a little odd, that you would do something like that. So I guess the question is, is there something the county wants to do to sort of cause the collection of recyclables curbside?
Mac, do you have an opinion on that? You want to? I mean, I don't want to put you on the spot. You want to save that for a public works meeting and.
One of the first times I met Mayor McFarland was in a meeting talking about recycling. I said it then, I'll say it now. Well, if we have in our system today for trash, it's much easier and cheaper for you to throw everything away than to recycle. Until our trash bill gets here and recycling is free, we're not going to recycle.
And that's going to be true for a while. In fact, it is true even with counties that have a little bit higher tipping fees. It still makes more expensive right now to recycle than it is to do it. So it's not economics. Economics not going to drive it. All right, well, let's keep moving. I just want to start to get some dialogue, and I think, again, it's 9 o'clock. All right. Well, I don't want to keep you too much beyond this. Let's. I don't want to take up more time than we've had a lot of fun here. I want to talk about what we're trying to accomplish for next scenario, and what I suggest we do is for us to come back with a few. Actually, let me think about this. Why don't we try to come up with, say, a couple scenarios that we think might work, and we're going to try to throw them around. We'll call them keystones. Some philosophy. One would be, nothing in the county. Maybe it's an out-of-county option where you're really just going to rely on the market out of the county and build an option. Maybe something would be an in-county option. Maybe another one would be expanding middle point and then something down the lines. Maybe we'll try to throw a couple of things out there. And I think we need to communicate before our next workshop in terms of trying to have some dialogue so we can come to our next workshop with some details. What we want to start to show you is what will these systems cost? What could they look like and what could they cost? Because really, it's hard for you to come and say, really, we like this solution because we gave you some ideas on what things may cost, but we need to go back and really kind of get a sense for what that may mean. One thing we're missing from the picture is regional partners. And maybe I'll ask the question, just how interested is this group in looking at solutions with regional partners if it allows for significant benefits and costs or other technologies that may not be able to be afforded.
That plays into a question that I was going to ask. Actually, what I was thinking is that for these technologies that you say we simply don't have the volume to support, if you could just list those with their thresholds, okay. I think that would be helpful. And if we're then, thinking about that in the context of a potential regional solution, I think we would definitely need that information for that. If we added a Cannon County, for instance, it might not get us in that direction very far because they're so small.
Let me throw out three ideas that are just top of my head. So let's say one is a regional solution that has a volume of scale that allows you to look at some technologies, and we could try to lay those out. But those things would be only at volume. So that's maybe one scenario. A second scenario could be, an out-of-county disposal for what you are currently managing in the county. You may, offer it up to the private haulers, but really you're going to take care of the 300,000 to 400,000 tons that's generated within Rutherford County. And that may or may not include as a part-time solution the expanding middle point. Maybe middle point's sort of a stopgap in any of these measures. And then the third option could be something, what could be done within Rutherford County, what can be done at home.
And you're going to put a 20 to 30 year time frame on this? I mean, this.
Yeah, we're looking at 20 years. I think was our horizon that we were going to try to throw some scenarios out at.
And what has Davidson County? What progress have they made with respect to their RFP they issued, et cetera, and what direction do you see that they're taking, if any, yet?
They have indicated in their RFP that they are looking at trying to avoid landfill disposal, trying to avoid it, trying to go to options that look at the full cost of landfilling and try to compare that, to other solutions. Costs of landfill disposing can be argued to be not truly borne by the facilities, whether they be, emissions, especially on the greenhouse gas, or, other aspects that are not taken into account. So I think they have indicated that they're trying to look at that way, but we don't know much about where they're really heading. I think that they are someone that, if you're looking at a regional solution, would be a natural, someone to talk about. But we'll leave the partners to be sort of a non-specific at this point.
And these other counties that are currently coming here, not including Davidson, they're smaller.
Yeah.
Do they have other options for landfills that are close by, or would they be maybe a really willing kind of partner to think about this process?
They could be, and I know when we started the process, we suggested that maybe, they should be part of the discussions at some point, especially if the county is interested in a potential regional solution. They're going to need to be part. You can't have a partnership without a partner. So I think that is something that needs to be part of a discussion, if that is something that you want to go down the road on. But yeah, I think anyone who's actually currently coming here would be obviously a natural partner to talk about what the solution is going forward. And whether that could be a regional solution that's sited here in the county or, sited outside, that's actually separate, almost a little bit separate of the discussion.
Talking about Metro raises a question for me. I read in there, in the December 2015 report done for them, that their disposal contract with Republic ends in 2022, 5 years out. How much pressure is Metro going to be putting on Middle Point and TDEC to allow expansion? And if that's something that they're interested in and press for, it could happen anyway, regardless of what we do.
I'm not aware of them putting pressure on the expansion. I can't speak to Republic as to whether or not they're in discussions. I've not heard that being an issue.
I guess my point is that some of these things are kind of out of our control, and they have a bigger problem than we have in terms of the amount of waste that they're generating. So they've got to be seriously considering a pretty wide array of options, despite their aspiration to put nothing in a landfill.
If it was expanded, would it have to come before the county, though?
What's that, sir?
If the landfill was expanded, would the county have to approve that? No.
TDEC has number one.
TDEC.
They're the law of the land.
We have no control over it.
I have a couple of sort of closing slides I'd like just to run through with you, if you can, sort of as sort of the next steps. And one, just sort of laying out the idea of what's going to make something successful in this county. It's not just coming up with the strategy. You're going to have both goals, the economics laid out, roles and responsibilities, and help along the way as you do this. But I think the strategy is one piece of this, but you're going to have to take it into consideration of all the other things that need to make it happen. This is the process we threw out before, just to get you a sense. We're looking at going through 3 workshops, having some ideas being thrown out there, developed and created, not as a formal strategy yet, but sort of maybe scenarios or options or things that we can put out there to the public and say, these are the things that are being considered, for the county, and getting input. Then taking that back, developing the plan based on that, based on all the input and everything else, with the recommendations and guidance of this group, and then bringing it to, obviously, to a selection and an implementation. The 3rd workshop was really to try to finalize the scenarios. So we tried to get started there, and I appreciate you working with me to do this. I think we're going to try and take some steps in the meantime to come up with some options and run them by you, probably through email, and see what kind of back and forth we can have. We'll work with the working group of the county and the city to develop the best plan. But I think by the time we come to our next workshop, we want to present some ideas to you, some concepts of different ways to look at a strategic plan, and get some reaction maybe when you bundle these together, along with hopefully some analysis that makes sense for you to understand. And the type of analysis we're looking at, probably one of the most importantly, would be cost, time to implement, let's say diversion. What will you get from a recycling standpoint, or diversion from landfill perspective, and how complex is it going to be? How difficult is it going to be to implement? And also develop sort of the framework for what this strategic plan is going to look like. Not only the scenarios, but what do you want to include in the strategic plan? This is the schedule we put out there before. We're in February, and we had a second workshop. The flag got a little bit to the end of February. We are looking at April to have our next workshop. So between now and April, we'll have some dialogue with you and hopefully develop, the framework of some scenarios that we can come back with. Then we'll have a public outreach piece of this, come back and develop the strategic plan with the idea of finalizing a plan by August and presenting that back to the county and the city. Are there any questions that or anything anybody wants to discuss at this point? I appreciate you taking the time. Time flies when you're having fun.
Are these materials on the web somewhere, the slideshow?
It can be. I don't see any reason why it can't be. The county has a website, and I think we can work to put up all the documents. Our first thing, and this one too. Yeah, absolutely. I think that makes sense.
Thanks.
Any other questions? All right. Thank y'all so much.
Thank you very much for all your participation. Really appreciate it.
Okay.